This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at Kevin Kautzman and at Brad Kelly. Hey, and we're back with another fun-filled, action-packed episode of the podcast about the dark side of creativity, Art of Darkness. Welcome to the foul year of our Lord, 2022. And I think it's fair to say, in the spirit of all those twos, we've got a very special treat for you. I have not one, but two members of the Brad Kelly household. And
that's right.
I promise not to get jealous of my podcast husband. We have to share Brad periodically. So it's all about twos here today. So we have two subjects and we've got two people here. Brad, obviously my partner in crime. Brad, why don't you tell us what we got going on today?
Yeah. I was going to say, man, I'm generally not into polyamory, but with the podcast husband thing, you got to be, it's an open relationship. It doesn't mean I don't love you,
It's open, to be clear, crystal clear, because we are putting this out on the internet. You're open to podcasting with other people.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's fair to say too.
But I'll always come home, Kevin. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. And people, you can find us on Twitter at Art of Dark Pod and at Brad Kelly if you're interested in our polyamorous podcasting. I know you're going to be a guest on another pod. You're going to talk about Johnny Cash.
Yeah, we're doing it. Yeah, absolutely. So it's all happening. So tonight we are going to talk about the great Lucille Ball, but not just Lucille Ball, because you can't tell the Lucille Ball story without also telling the Desi Arnaz story, or as most people call him, Desi Arnaz. This isn't one, it's about two people, and I don't have the expertise necessarily to handle talking about it myself in as much depth as we could if we brought in a super fan. And luckily, I happen to be married to a wonderful woman full of positive attributes. And one of them is that she is a Lucille Ball super fan. So we're going to welcome my lovely wife, Jolie Vitale, to the show. And we're going to try to handle this together. And hopefully we're still married at the end of it. But
don't cross the streams, Brad. Never. Okay, we're going to have to cross the streams. That's all right. Very good.
So if anything happens, I'm sure we'll find other people to podcast with.
Yeah, that's right. Wanted to bring her in. Jolie, why don't you tell us, one thing, let me do this first. And then we'll talk about Jolie's relationship with Lucille Ball. For people who don't know, you must have been born since the year 2000. If you don't know about Lucille Ball, and the show, of course, I Love Lucy, one of the most popular shows of all time, certainly in its own time, was it's not one of, but it was the most popular television program. Completely doesn't seem like it to us now, but completely radicalized the format, to be honest. The reason you have, family sitcoms that came later that are, easy to make fun of maybe, but the reason all those exist is because I Love Lucy existed. So we're talking about something that is really pretty groundbreaking, and the people behind it are also fascinating people who live fascinating lives, with the appropriate amount of darkness, I promise. So with that, I guess I got to ask our question though. First, Kevin, what do you know about Lucille Ball, right. Desi Arnaz?
The question is, what do I know about Desilu? Before I answer, I just want to say a little bit of housekeeping on every episode of Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com. Yep. We keep a special side story type little nugget for the After Dark episode, which you can get through our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. I would be remiss not to start there.
Yes,
I assume that Desilu sold a lot of soap and they sold a lot of household products, probably defined a certain type of vision of middle America. In their personal lives, I have no clue.
Oh, good.
Absolutely no clue. I do think at one point I saw on like schizo posting Twitter that the idea about I Love Lucy is Lucy stands for Lucifer.
Oh, jeez.
Something crazy like this, like on YouTube, you end up down one of these rabbit holes.
Right.
And, Satanists have controlled Lucy. But that is probably not the best answer to your question.
I'll click around a little bit. I haven't seen any of that research.
Never click the third link. Always stop after 2. But I really don't know. I would imagine if I had to fill in the gaps real quickly, I would say I would imagine they must have been lifelong Californians, and yet they feel like middle America. They feel like Midwestern Americans. So probably maybe transplants, but I'm just guessing. The answer is, I don't know. I'm excited to find out.
Good.
That's
good.
The reasons I love doing Art of Darkness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, we've got a lot of gaps to fill, and that's good because we've got a lot of interesting stories and cool factoids to kind of fill that in. But before we dig into that too much, I want to talk a little bit about what I Love Lucy means to Jolie, our guest, and what it means to our household. Okay. So Jolie, maybe you can kind of step in there and talk about your sort of history with the subject.
Yeah, I mean, I started watching I Love Lucy when I was probably, I'm guessing about 10 to 12 in that range. And it was on Nick at Night. And they would just do episode. It was the original binging. They would do multiple episodes in a row and I could watch it for a few hours. And I became very quickly a fangirl. I kept a little notebook of all the episodes and what their subjects were about. And I started collecting things when I went antiquing with my mom. And got into Lucille Ball a little bit when I was younger and forgot most of that. Not the show, but just, her life details. And then my daughter, when she probably, I think was about 6 or 7, started watching I Love Lucy and became immediately enamored with it, would watch it end to end. And she has dressed up as an I Love Lucy character for, I believe, 3 Halloweens now, different characters. She did Lucille Ball for her hero day at school. Nobody knows who she is anymore. And so we have a lot of, we have pets named Lucy. I mean, this has just been a big thing throughout my entire life. And one of the things that I was excited about digging back in at this phase is that, number one, if you read anything about, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz and who they were, you'll get very different perspectives. You'll hear things like she wasn't funny and she was very severe and all these things. It's very polarizing and it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't really, I'm like, do I like this woman at all? And so it was a great journey because I think I found that I did like her. And she plays this very funny person on TV. And so I think that the temptation is for the pendulum to swing to the other side and to over highlight some of her negative qualities, which were certainly there. But she wasn't devoid of the positives. And so that was the first one. And then the second one is that it was very interesting learning about Desi. And he was such a huge driver. And their daughter, Lucy, Lucie, will often criticize most of the articles and documentaries for not giving Desi the credit that he deserved. So I'm really excited for all the research that Brad did and everything you're going to talk about, because he was quite the businessman. He would certainly rival some of the top businessmen today.
Yeah, that was something, we decided to do this, and I didn't know a whole lot about Lucy as a person, and I knew even less about Desi. And I was like, well, I guess I'll take the Desi half. And then by the end of it was like, this guy is kind of my hero. Like, he's got problems for sure. And he's not he wasn't perfect, but by the end I was super impressed with him. So we're going to kind of take you through all of that.
Can you hint for me what the After Dark story is going to be? Do you have that on lock?
Yeah, well, we know what we're talking about. How would I hint it exactly? Well, here's one thing. Desi was, when he was a teenager, was friends with Al Capone's son. And
all right, some gangster stuff.
Yeah, that is the smallest granule of gangster entanglements that they sort of have.
So we're gonna save some of the gangster stuff for the Patreon. Okay, great, so, good to know.
Yeah. So I guess I'm gonna start with telling the Desi story, the early bio stuff, and then we've kind of got a plan here. So bear with us. But so we'll start with Desi. His full name is Desiderio Alberto Arnaz e Diacha III. Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah, quite a name, right? So he's shortened that.
The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.
Yeah. He was born March 2nd, 1917. Died December 2nd, 1986. He was born in Santiago de Cuba, which is remains the second largest city in Cuba and was at the time. Now here's the interesting part. He's a Cuban immigrant, and our vision of an immigrant from another country is often somebody who comes from a difficult situation, poverty, no work, difficult education, those kinds of things. Not the case with Desi. Desi was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His father was the youngest mayor of Santiago. His maternal and also was a doctor. His maternal grandfather was one of the founders of Bacardi rum. His maternal grandfather's friend had brewed the first batch of Bacardi rum, and they sold it together on muleback. So took it from selling it to friends in the neighborhood up to a major company. And Bacardi is one of the few. It sort of, as a corporation, it kind of escaped Cuba later. So it's one of the few international companies that has its roots in Cuba to this day. So that's kind of just interesting stuff. His paternal grandfather was a renowned, kind of famous doctor within Cuba, and was known for he had been the doctor for Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. So he was like,
oh wow,
yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, right. So very.
So they must have maybe ended up out in North Dakota at some point.
The Rough Riders. So the Rough Riders were engaged in a bunch of places, but they were engaged in the Caribbean and in Cuba.
Oh, right. Of course. But yeah, when I think about Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, I think about North Dakota. But yeah, they probably weren't out there. But Teddy was. Teddy
was for sure. Yeah. There's another interesting little bit too. So in 1869, I want to paint you a picture of what this family is all about. 1869, the Queen of Spain had appointed Desi's great-grandfather the mayor of Santiago, right? So Desi's father was a duly elected mayor, but his great-grandfather had been appointed the mayor of Santiago, and his great-grandfather had been appointed the mayor by the Queen. His great-great-grandfather and his wife Ventura had been given a bunch of land in Southern California by the Queen of Spain. Ventura, right? Think about that name, what that means in California. Ventura Boulevard in the San Fernando Valley, Ventura County. These things are named after Desi's great-great-grandmother.
Jesse Ventura?
Jesse Ventura?
No relation, I assume.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
That's a big name. Wow, I had no idea. But of course, maybe it's not that surprising. Rich kids still get into TV. It's a hard thing to break into.
Yeah. Well, we'll find that didn't help him at all. But
okay, all right. Okay. What do I know?
Yeah. But so this is a wealthy family with multiple houses. Their main house was a sort of a palatial estate. They had farms that other people worked for them. They had massive livestock. They had a vacation sort of. I think he describes it in the book, his autobiography. My primary source for this is actually Desi's autobiography, which he called a book. Which
that might be my favorite. So wait, he just called it a book?
A book.
That was the title.
The title of his autobiography
is a book. That is now my second favorite title for an autobiography. You want to know my favorite?
What's your favorite?
Crowley called his autobiography an autohagiography. which is
because he's telling you he's a saint. Yeah.
Life of a Saint. Yeah, very, very funny. I cannot wait to do Mr. Crowley.
That's gonna be.
We're gonna have to do him around like Halloween or so. Actually, we do it around Crowley Mass, which happens to be my daughter's birthday as well.
That right?
So, okay. Yes. Ooh, spooky. what can it mean? October 12th. Yeah. We'll figure that out.
Look out for that, folks.
Okay.
For sure. Okay. So, point is very wealthy, good access to education. There's another aspect of this growing up in Cuba thing. His paternal grandfather had two houses, one house for his wife and like the official family, and another house for the girlfriend who he also sort of had a family with. Ooh. And Desi talks about this being common in Latin America. I don't have any experience with this in Latin America, but this is the voice of Desi saying this. And if you were a high status man in Cuba, this was common. This is what you did. That getting conditioned in that way is going to lead to some problems for him trying to be an American. But okay, so he's got this great life in Cuba, right? Why is he in America, right? Why leave? Okay. So in 1933, so most people are somewhat familiar with Castro's takeover of Cuba, right? And the country kind of came to be ruled by a one-party state. It became what we would now call a second world nation, allied with the Ruskies. And then the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of that. This is a revolution that precedes that. Desi would say things like, they were communists, but we didn't even have that word yet. We were taken over by Bolsheviks. Right. So this is 1933. So we got to kind of go back in time a little bit, but it's a similar pattern, right? The country at that time was being run by this guy named Gerardo Machado, who was a former general. And he had some very authoritarian policies. And when the Great Depression in 1929 affected kind of the whole world, his authoritarian policies ran into economic crisis. And there was some folks who were upset, you might say. And so he was pressured to resign. There was a power vacuum. The military aligned with student activists kind of took over, and they started just flipping the table in general. And because Desi's father was the mayor of the second largest city in Cuba, had allegiances to Machado, even though they had a somewhat troubled relationship together, the Desi household, the Arnaz household was burned to the ground. The activists killed all of their animals, and young Desi would later ask, well, did they kill them to eat them? No, they just killed them. They just shot the horses and the pigs and the sheep and everything and just left them there, right?
Tell me again, just slow down 1 second.
Sure.
What year are we in?
This is 1933. So Desi is 16 or so.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So a teenager seeing this tumultuous revolution. His father's the mayor of this big city. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Let me read a little bit, because this is we're kind of hitting some darkness pretty early, right? He's 16. He goes from being a rich, spoiled kid, playing guitar on the beach, to being a political refugee in a very short period of time, right? So let me give you this quote. Our house in Santiago wasn't the only one that was ransacked and burned. At least 20 or 30 more suffered the same fate. Some of them belonged to people who weren't even in the government, such as poor Salvador. Just because he was my father's brother, they burned down his stinking little soap factory. Grandma and grandfather Alberto were almost blown to pieces by a bomb in front of their house. Thank God they were not sitting by the window in their rocking chairs. They were saved by being at the birthday party of one of their grandchildren in the inside patio. Grandpa had never been into politics. The actions of such a mob, incited and manipulated by those who know how, are difficult to believe and frightening to witness. You could point a finger at someone and say, "He killed my brother." And without any regard to whether it was true or not, they would shoot him, or worse, tie a rope to his ankle and drag him through the streets. I saw such an incident. The poor fellow was bouncing from one sidewalk to the other as they dragged him all the way to the cemetery. And there, if by chance he was still alive and they had 1 ounce of pity left in them, they finally shot him as you would a crippled horse. By this time, the soldiers and policemen were scared to death and outnumbered, so they became mere onlookers in the midst of the mob. Right. So
yeah, that's a pretty far away from campus revolution, the sort of fake campus Bolshevism you see. This is some real
right. This is
real.
like they're going to burn down your house, and if you're
they're going to kill your grandmother.
Right. They will.
Yeah,
they might if she gets in the way. Right.
Fun.
Like
fun.
Yeah.
That's fun. I bet Desi, when he came to America and ultimately integrated and everything, or I don't know if the word integrated is right, but I bet he was a diehard. I bet he loved it.
He loved America. Yeah. Like he's
right,
more as patriotic as the three of us combined.
I am in Miami right now, by the way. Yeah. This is the Miami studio for the month here.
Right,
and
right.
So
well, this is a perfect episode.
I am among the Cuban Americans, and very good. I am loving the food. I had some incredible Peruvian seafood today. Right. It was dynamite.
Excellent.
Anyway,
excellent.
Very good.
Excellent.
So, muy bien.
So Desi ends up in Miami. His father is imprisoned, and there's some hullabaloo. And I won't go into all the details, but his father is released, and he and Desi come to America, and they have. I've read two different things. They had something like $300 or $400 between them when they showed up in Florida, right? So you go from having a personal driver and multiple houses and all these things to $300 or $400. I don't know what that is adjusted for inflation, but it's probably a couple grand, so,
maybe a little more than that. But we're not talking about a lot of money.
It's probably not a lot of
certainly
money.
not $1 million.
Right. And the other thing, zero prospects. It's, what I mean? You show up, you don't really know anybody. You don't know the language. Desi didn't know English. His father certainly didn't know English. And whereas Miami is now, there would be a community of those kinds of folks, of Cuban immigrants. There were none then, right? You couldn't, in Miami in 1933, you didn't walk down the street and have, I'm going to go into this restaurant because they speak Spanish here. There's none of that. So it was a pretty difficult time kind of making that adjustment. So his dad did have one kind of last connection that was able to get him to go to this Jesuit high school for free. And he was able to learn English that way and graduate high school. There's the same high school that Al Capone's son went to. And Desi once briefly spoke to Al Capone on the phone and was kind of freaked out about it. But kind of a cool thing, and puts
that is so wild, because Al Capone at one point was in St. Paul, Minnesota too, I believe.
Was he?
So that's where they would hide out. They used to call St. Paul, where I live most, I'm there most of the time. They used to call it Crooks Haven. There's a whole story. We're gonna do some Minnesota stuff down there. But it's so interesting. These guys got around. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And so had sent his boy down to the school for whatever reason. I don't know much about I know about as much about Al Capone as, the average person, I suppose.
I think we could do him at some point. The crime is an art to some level. On some level. Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah. So Desi describes his whole time in Miami, despite being sort of tricky. Once things kind of started to settle in, I think he started to have some fun, even though he was, they were pretty poor. Now, there is a very important, I think, story to tell you about his dad, to show you the kind of guys the Arnazes were, right? So come to the city with nothing, come to America with nothing. Come from a place where you're extremely successful. You could argue that stuff was just, you had the Queen of Spain gave your great grandfather stuff. You didn't earn any of this, this is all. But his dad and one or two other Cuban refugees, they start an importing business. And now they try a couple different things. There's like a time where they try to import bananas and it doesn't really work out. And they have a couple of different things that they try. They import some tile, some Cuban sort of hand decorated tile. And it shows up, and they had put like all of the rest of the money that they had into this, to buying this tile and bringing it to America. They show up and a bunch of it is broken, right? And then, you're looking at a pile of broken tile. This is your last shot. What do we do now? It's all busted. We can't do anything. Desi's dad decides he's going to make the best of it. And he goes to a builder in Miami and with these broken tiles and basically says like, well, we could build we could use these tiles the way the Cubans do. And the builder's sort of like, well, what do you mean? Well, you see, in Cuba, we break the tiles very carefully. And then what we do is we reassemble them and tile them in a very artistic manner. It looks really good. And the builder's like, well, can you show me how to do it? And Desi and his dad are like, they've never actually tiled anything before. He's just making this up, right?
This is some flim-flammery. We've got some high-grade flim-flam men.
Right. So they do it, they put the tile around this fireplace the best they can. And the builder just luckily is actually impressed by it and thinks it looks good. So he then gets a contract with this builder who's building all these new homes to do all of the fireplaces with this broken tile. And now it's like this she thing to do in Miami for a very short period of time.
I love this. This is America is jazz. You got to think on your feet. You got to keep moving.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then it went so well that the next shipments of tile that came in, they had to run over them in a truck in the back alley. Because now they got to sell broken tile, right?
Oh my God. It's like the people who distress clothing, right?
Right.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But I wanted that. So that was his dad's idea, but whatever that gene was, Desi had that gene, that savviness, that thinking on your feet, that like, how do we get from point A to B? Because we're getting to point B no matter what, right? He had that. He's very intelligent, very strong-willed kind of guy. And that's not to say he was like domineering or anything, but if he was in a situation, he was going to figure out how to make the most out of it. So when he's like, right after he graduated, actually while he's in high school, he starts playing for a Roomba band. He'd been playing music all along. He starts playing for this Roomba band at the Roni Plaza in Miami. And he meets this guy named Xavier Cugat. Now, nobody knows who Xavier Cugat is anymore. But at the time, we're talking the 1930s, he was a big name touring. It's not quite big band, but you'd have these orchestras, these like nightclub orchestras. And Xavier Cugat was kind of the only guy doing this with a Latin flair, you might say. Mm-hmm. But it was very, very successful. He had a standing gig at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. Desi gets a job working and playing and singing for Xavier Cugat. So he goes up to New York City. He's making a pittance, but he's building a resume. And most importantly, because he's Desi, he thinks of himself as being in school. Okay, I'm working with this guy who is successful. What can I pay attention to? What can I learn about the business so that I can do this myself, right? Within 6 months, Desi quits Xavier Cugat on good terms, starts up his own thing. He actually becomes sort of a Xavier Cugat franchise because he agrees if he gives Xavier Cugat a little bit of money, he can use Cugat's name and advertise him as Desi Arnaz from the Xavier Cugat band, right?
Cugat. What a name. What kind of name is Cugat?
Right. I don't know. They would call him Coogie, which I think is a cool nickname.
Fun.
So anyway, 6 months with him. Now, he's still like 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. He goes back down to Miami. He decides he's going to start his own thing. He's got a deal with Cugat. Cugat tells him, hey, Desi, if you get a thing going, I'll send you a couple of guys to get a band going, right? So Desi, one other guy from the band comes with Desi. They decide they're gonna figure this out. They go into the nightclub. They'd heard about a new sort of Latin themed nightclub that would be starting up. They go into another club owned by this famous guy who had kind of gangster connections named Mother Kelly in Miami. And there you can Google Mother Kelly. He's a sort of a famous name in Florida in the 30s. And they start throwing money around. Desi and his buddies start throwing money around, buying champagne, tipping the cigarette girl, all of this, even though they didn't have any money. Desi says they had $20 total, like total $20. They're throwing money around and they're basically just trying to get the attention, right? They're trying to get somebody to start paying attention to him so they can make this connection to this guy, Nick, who's starting up this other club. So they do. Of course, it works. And Desi is a sort of a known guy somewhat in Miami already from playing the Roni Plaza and all that. And they basically string along this young Nick guy who's trying to start his own club. They within this one conversation, they turn it around to the fact that Nick is basically begging them to play. It's really funny how it's done because Desi's like, Desi's basically a dropout from Xavier Cugat's band, but he plays it like he was the star. He's like, Xavier said, you know what, Desi, you've done so well for me. You go down to Florida and you take a break for a while, okay? You know, you just... And so
more flimflammery.
Exactly.
We're breaking the tiles again.
Yes, exactly. And this is how he rolls. He's faking it.
This is a good metaphor. Yeah.
He fakes it until he makes it, and then makes it right. Like
this is America, baby.
Mm-hmm. This is what he loves, and this is what he loves about America. Is like you come to America with nothing, and if you're smart and you work hard, things happen.
You occasionally commit a little bit of fraud.
Occasionally commit a little bit of fraud.
Just ride the line. Yeah.
If you're like stunningly handsome and charismatic, that
right? And you come from this family and this lineage, right? Yeah, it's show business, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. So okay. Anyway, so he starts playing this club, and this is another cool thing, and we're gonna bring Jolie back into this to talk about Lucille, but we're gonna get Desi up to a point here. So anyway, he gets the deal to play this show, and his deal with Xavier Cugat, the guy he was working with before, is Cugat's going to send him some guys to get a band started. So, all right, he calls up Cugat and he's like, hey, I got a gig playing Latin music at this new club. You can send me some guys. Cugat says, I got you. So a handful of guys show up, 2 Jews, a Spanish guy, and an Italian guy, which this is not a race thing, but like they didn't know how to play Latin music.
It's like they walked into a bar.
Yeah.
It was just the start of a joke.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to play Latin music.
And
right?
the whole gig is he's supposed to be playing Latin music.
Oh boy.
Okay. So he says the show, and they're not even the right instruments. He's got like a violin player. Like the whole thing is wrong. They showed up like either the day before or the day of the first show. So he's got 2 sets to do, right? After the first one, it's so bad that the owner of the club fires him. And then Desi says, hold on, let me do one more show. Let me do one more thing. And then we'll see how that goes. So he's kind of racking his brain. He's thinking, and he's like, he remembers doing conga lines back in Santiago. Okay. Conga lines, people loved them in Santiago. It was sort of like a Mardi Gras thing. And the conga line would go on for 3 days. And he thought to himself, that rhythm is so easy. Like these guys can play that. We'll get a pan out of the kitchen. We'll put a nail in it. It's very easy and it's repetitive. Like we'll just do a conga and hopefully it works out. Okay, so they do this conga line thing. Now you have to remember, we know about conga lines. America didn't know anything about conga lines. Desi basically, as far as Americans are concerned, Desi Arnaz invented the conga line that night, trying to save his butt in this nightclub.
Amazing. You got to think on your feet. I love it.
Yeah, it went crazy. It went incredibly well. I mean, it went well enough that, a couple of years later, he was playing in a nightclub called La Conga in New York City, right? Like that's how it spread. It was viral. It was viral pre-internet, right?
I just love that for the guys who were already fired off of the first set.
Right.
He hands them a pan,
right.
And he's like, here's how we're going to get our job back.
Yeah.
Play this pan.
Yeah. And he shows them how to do it. Because it's like, I can't remember exactly, but the rhythm is super simple. And he like shows them how they've got to do it. Right. And they're like, okay. And you're some guy who, knows how to play the violin. Suddenly you're just playing some pans.
And we're in the 30s here.
Yeah, this would be like 1935 or so.
Yeah, so you have all these stuffy Americans. It's this interwar period. You've got a lot of money, I imagine, down in Miami.
There's getting to be some, yeah.
They're looking for any excuse to dance and to party and to do something different. And
and they loved it. And now you got this guy, Desi was a very handsome guy, very charismatic. He's up there slamming on the drums, sweating. His whole thing was to play until he got sweat and the tie had to come off and the hair's all
unbuttoning
crazy.
My top button right now.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
here we go.
Yeah. And, he would go down and play like to one individual woman, playing that. Like, he knew what he was
you're
doing.
going to play. Yeah, you're going to hype up the kind of Latin heat kind of thing, right?
He knew he knew exactly what he was doing, right? So this music to us sounds, it doesn't really appeal to me in a very deep way, I have to say. But like when you see performances of him, it's clear that he had mastered his craft. Right. He knew how to lead. He knew how to lead a band, how to put on a show for a group of people. Like he'd figured all that out by the time he's like 22 years old.
I mean, and if you can get all of these stuffy Americans who are on vacation, who are looking for permission to let rip,
Right.
If you can get them all dancing, it's like a comedian who is actually good at crowd work.
Right.
The crowd does half the work.
Yeah.
If you get them dancing,
oh yeah,
you're working the room.
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, you're getting it all stirred up and getting those temperatures up, and getting everybody
right. And they're buying drinks, and everybody's getting loose, and the night goes until close.
Yeah.
Everybody's having a good time.
Yeah, exactly. So So now he ends up taking this up to New York. There's some interludes, but the important thing is he ends up going back up to New York and he starts playing this La Conga club. He gets reeled into doing a Broadway show called Too Many Girls. They needed
Too Many Girls. Impossible.
Impossible.
I don't believe the premise.
Well, he jokes in interviews later. He says, when I was doing Too Many Girls, I'm talking about the Broadway show,
right. Perfect. Nice. Very good.
So he goes up and he gets involved. They needed a Latin heartthrob type. And they were kind of few and far between in those times to find somebody like that who had the acting, there wasn't as the depth and breadth of the Hispanic community wasn't like it is now. You wouldn't have to search far and wide to find a super talented guy from Mexico or Cuba or whatever. But at that time, it wasn't a large community. So he kind of slid right in there. He gets into Too Many Girls. Too Many Girls is a huge hit. They're touring, mostly playing in New York. There is a period of time when Desi is playing on Broadway. He doesn't have the lead role, but he was sort of the steal the scene guy. And then from there, he would go play La Conga every night for like 5 nights a week, right? So he was like, there was a minute there where he was like the biggest deal in New York City entertainment. It wasn't a very long period of time, but like everybody knew who Desi Arnaz was, right?
This is Purple Rain period.
Yeah, for sure. And he's partying. He's drinking quite heavily. He's starting to develop some habits that are gonna haunt him a little bit later. He gets.
So this was a Broadway show.
Yes, it was a Broadway show.
And where was Congo?
That was La Conga. The club was in New York.
Conga.
Was in New York City, someplace.
Do you know? Okay, yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
I'm kind of curious where it was. Yeah, I might look it up in the background.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it was, but yeah. So he would play. But the interesting thing, he would do both of those things in one night, which that's not easy to do, man. Right?
No.
And then he would. And then here's the thing. So he started to become such a playboy. He got involved with Polly Adler, who, if you look up Polly Adler, was like a famous madame. Now, Desi kind of claims that she just lavished, like that he spent a lot of time at Polly Adler's, house of ill repute, and that it was all sort of just gifted to him. I don't know that I believe that exactly, but he definitely was partaking in the goods at Polly Adler's. And she, if you're a madame with a Wikipedia page, you're you're a big deal, right?
Sure.
So the Too Many Girls thing happened. It goes well, and then he gets pulled into the film for Too Many Girls. One thing I want to back up on Too Many Girls, and then we're gonna switch gears here pretty soon. Too Many Girls was a Rodgers and Hart production, and I don't know, Kevin, if that name rings a bell for you.
Vaguely.
Yeah, I mean, they were big musical guys at that period. They're sort of on the Mount Rushmore of early Broadway musicals, I would say. And again, just like Desi paid attention to Xavier Cugat, he paid attention to how these guys worked. He was constantly, on the one hand, he's this sweaty guy banging on a drum. On the other hand, everything that happens, he is paying attention and figuring out how he, what skills he can pick up, learning how these things work. So he learned how to master a band in a crowd. Now he's in a play. So what can you learn here about stage blocking, about how a scene has to be set up, about how dramatic action works, how comedic action works? He's picking up all these pieces. He's a total sponge. Now when Too Many Girls gets picked up to be a film, he's lucky enough to get brought in on that cast. And so he has to go out to California, buys an old big new gray Buick Roadmaster, goes on this cross-country trip, which has got to be kind of cool, right? He showed up in Florida, and now he's getting to see this whole big country that he's kind of rapidly fallen in love with. So that's all pretty cool. Now, there is one other person who's on this Too Many Girls show, and that is Lucille Ball. So I'm going to read you this little bit. About from a book about meeting Lucille Ball. So he comes into RKO and he's getting introduced around. He's talking about what the movie's like and all of that. And this is from Desi. So we were expecting that image to walk in talking about an ingenue, and in walks Lucille Ball, whom I didn't recognize. Miss Ball had just come from a stage where she had been filming Dance Girl Dance with Maureen O'Hara, in which they both played burlesque queens. She had just finished a scene with Miss O'Hara in which they had been in a big fight. So now she looked like a $2 whore who had been badly beaten by her pimp, with her hair all over her face and a black eye, and she was dressed in a cheap costume. She had just stopped by to say hello to George Abbott, who was the director of Too Many Girls. After she left, I asked Mr. Abbott, "Who the heck was that?" He answered, "That's the girl who's going to play the ingenue. That's Lucille Ball. That's Lucille Ball, and she's going to do the ingenue thing. You got to be kidding." Well, now, wait a minute. She was in makeup for something else. I think you've blown your top, George. There's no way they can change her to look like an ingenue. So that's their first meeting. She comes in and he's like, huh? Like, what is this? Now, that isn't a good, that doesn't bode well for a torrid love affair and lifelong romance, but that's the start of it. It's half movie magic. There's some confusion about what she's going to be. She's kind of being introduced as his love interest, introduced to him as his love interest, right? Because that's the role she's going to play. And now I want to stop there because now we've met Lucy, and now we got to get Lucy up to this point too, to see what kind of person Lucille Ball is when he meets her. So I'm gonna shut up for a minute and let Jolie do the talking.
Before Jolie, if I may, I just want to say I found it that La Conga opened on Broadway and 51st in 1929, and by 1937 it was wildly popular in New York.
Partially due to Desi. Actually, probably he
introduced. It says he introduced the conga to the United States, which is just absolutely wild. All right, Jolie.
Yeah,
take it away. Right. We're doing our own little conga line here. Yeah. Here we go. All right.
Boom, chicka, boom, boom, chicka, boom, 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 boom.
All right, good.
All right. So Lucille Desiree Ball was born from Jamestown, New York. So your Midwest girl was very connected to Jamestown, which is a little town kind of by Lake Erie, and it's pretty small. She was born on August 6th, 1911. And her mom was 18. Her mom's name is Desiree, which is her middle name. They called her Dee Dee. And her dad's name was Henry Ball. He was 24. And so she's the oldest. She's going to have a brother later. But her formative moment started extremely young. So when she was about 3, her mom and dad moved to Detroit. And her dad was a lineman at the Michigan Bell Company. And her mom was pregnant with her younger brother, Fred. And he would go up in the storms in the winter, and he was sort of a hard worker. He would volunteer when other people were off, and he ended up getting typhoid. And so he gets sick, and he passes away. And so she's 3.5. Her mother was 5 months pregnant with her brother, Fred, when her husband dies. And so Lucy remembers this. She has like a snapshot of it in her head. She always remembers what happened, and she remembers looking out the window and she saw a bird, and the bird flew in, and she was terrified of birds her entire life. She would call them out of rooms. She would never have birds around her. During this time, her mom was really overwhelmed. They stayed in Detroit for a little while, and her mom actually would tie her to a clothesline in the backyard, and she would run back and forth. And they use this to describe how charming she was, because she would talk to neighbors as they walked by, and she'd be like, "Please, sir, could you please let me off the line and give me some water?" And so one day someone let her off the line, and this is how it went. So finally and I actually looked this up to try to figure out where it was, a Mr. Flowers, who owned a general store in Wyandotte, started to let her come hang out there when she was little. And she would sit on the counter and she would recite nursery rhymes and people would give her money. And so she sort of started making her earning very young.
Oh.
So they move back. Dee Dee decides to move back to Jamestown where her parents are and her sister lives. And she gets a job in a factory after World War I, and she meets somebody named Ed Peterson. So Ed Peterson will become Lucy's stepfather. He's Swedish. It sounds like he came over from Sweden, or his parents did. And so they get married when Lucy's 7 and Fred is 3. So Lucy is like, awesome, you are going to be my new dad. And she walks up to him at the wedding with this big grin. She like introduces her brother and she's like, can we call you dad now? And he says, call me Ed. So he just didn't really have a paternal bone in his body. Now they're going to have some really interesting relationship moments throughout her life. But right off the bat, he kind of made it clear, like, that's not what I'm here for. So
I just want to say that we're in Western upstate New York, correct? All right. So I'm buttoning my shirt.
Yeah, button it back up.
Button back up.
We actually, Jolie, and we went to Jamestown and saw the house. It would be this house, I guess, that Dee Dee and Ed moved into.
It would have been
Hunt's.
her grandfather's house.
Yeah. So she's still a big deal in Jamestown. Like, yeah,
she's huge.
Yeah, murals of her and a museum of her for her and Desi there, and all of it. So it's kind of cool if you're a fan to swing through Jamestown.
So Ed and Dee Dee don't ever have kids, but what they do is they go in search of work. So they leave Jamestown, they go back to Detroit. And so, Dee Dee's got these 2 kids and she thinks it's gonna be too much for her mom and her dad to handle. And Lucy's apparently a lot to handle. So she separates them. So she lets Fred go with her parents and she has Lucy go live with Ed's parents, who she does not know. They're very cold. They're very, strict and uptight. And so she's living there and, it's this really strict environment. So Sophia Peterson, which is Ed's mom, was very religious. And she was very cold. And one of the things that, she was so religious that she wouldn't allow mirrors in the house. And she thought that they were a sign of vanity. But Lucy is this natural comedian. I mean, she is absorbing everything. She's a sponge just as much as Desi is. And you'll see that throughout her career. And so when she would walk either past cars or by shops, she would look in the glass and she would make these faces at herself and see how she could manipulate her face to, do different movements, which if you've seen I Love Lucy, is that physical comedy is definitely her strength. And so she started that pretty
most
early.
Of the humor is like in her face, right? And her immediate reaction to things, I would say, is a lot of the humor of that show.
So she did a lot of chores. That was what she had a lot of tasks while she was there. She does remember when it was rainy, she would get to sit outside and play with these clothespin dolls. She had this whole fantasy thing. She had a fake friend named Sassafrasa that she made up. And so that was her life there. And she said, so it's funny because it sounds miserable. When you look back at her early life, there was just tragedy after tragedy. And one of the things she said is people with happy childhoods never overdo. They don't strive or exert themselves. They're moderate, pleasant, well-liked, and good citizens. Society needs them. But the tremendous drive and dedication necessary to succeed in any field, not only in show business, often seems to be rooted in a disturbed childhood. I wasn't an unloved or an unwanted child, but I was moved around a lot. And then the death and cruel circumstances brought many painful separations. So she has this very pragmatic, sort of view of what drove her when she was really young. So when she's 12, Dee Dee comes back and the entire family moves to Celeron together. And so she's now she went from living with the Petersons to living with her mom, Ed, her grandpa, Fred, her grandma, Flora, her aunt and her brother. And then her aunt had a daughter who's a big part of her life, who's around, I think 1 or 2 at the time. So now she has these kids that she can bring into all of her dramas. And, she has this really happy life. And this is like the happiest time of her life. She remembers this house just as being magical.
Whoa, that's a lot of people in a house. And you say,
a lot of people
you say Celeron. Where is this? Is this in New York as well?
Celeron, yeah, I think it's really close to Jamestown.
It's not far from Jamestown.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
And may I also ask, you mentioned this religious figure. What brand of religion? I assume some Christian sect. Were they Catholics? Was it Protestant? Oh, they were?
I don't know that they said which sector that I remember.
Okay.
But
that's fine. Yeah. No worries. Okay. Gotcha.
So she's there. All the adults are working. They all have jobs, and they were okay, but she grew up pretty poor. So every dollar went somewhere. They were, having to budget. There was no real excess, but they were just getting by. And so when they would be off at work, she was sort of in charge of taking care of the house. She was not very domestic. She would rather play. So the chores would often, barely get done. And, she was just sort of known as just wanting to play all the time. So she starts to go to school, and she does well in school. She does okay. Let me put it that way. If she doesn't like the teacher, she's not going to do very well. She was sort of like a C student, but she was very involved in drama. So she had a friend, Pauline, and they started this drama club. They were always doing plays. And she called Pauline Sassafrasa. So now she had a real life, and her imaginary friends had become real. And they would always... I know. They would always go to this park in Celeron where there was like a bandstand. So they would hear all the big bands come. There would be vaudeville. There'd be all sorts of things there. And this was a big, sort of hobby of what they did when, there was downtime.
Back when men wore hats and America was America and we didn't live in our screens.
Yes. That's right.
Go outside, people.
Yep. Go see a vaudeville show.
Go see a show for real.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, circuses. And she worked at a hamburger stand in the park.
Oh.
So she was, this was a large portion of her life. And right around this time, she's got this interest in drama. She had this interest in plays. And Ed takes her. He knows she wants to be on stage and she wants to be an actress. And Julius Tannen is in town, and he is a monologist, which he would get on stage. He would tell stories, he would do, they were funny, but it was sad. And she sat there and she was just entranced the entire time. And she heard him go from something sad to hilarious. And so Julius Tannen was sort of the first moment where she realized there's more out here than just what I see when I see these, Pauline sort of skits when they come into the theater. And it really opened up her eyes. And later when she goes to drama school, she'll actually recite a Julius Tannen monologue as a dramatic sort of class in her drama school. So she's hitting. Oh, go ahead.
So like a stand-up comedian, it's like early stand-up comedy.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it goes back to Mark Twain. I think was one of the early fellows to do this. You would get up and they would do. Yeah. I think I have a show title. I think it might be The Broken Tiles of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz.
Okay.
I like that. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Seems to get approval. Yeah, this idea of being a monologist is so interesting too.
I'm gonna start that up again. I'm gonna become a monologist.
Stand-up goes back a lot further than the sort of Lenny Bruce and all the rest. Although Lenny Bruce big breakthrough. That's going to be a fun episode to do, but right. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So we're hitting puberty at this point, and
oh no.
And Lucy becomes this wild little kid, becomes quite a partier. So she begins to go to dances, and her friends are not really allowed to hang out with her anymore because she's wild. And she meets a boy, Johnny DeVita. She was 14 years old, and he was either 21 or 23. The sources vary. And she falls madly in love with him. And Johnny runs liquor from Canada. And he has a ton of cars. His family has a bunch of cars, and she would sit on the hood of the car, and they would drive circles around Lake Chautauqua.
He is like a pure shot of Americana.
Oh yeah,
working at the burger stand, and you got the imaginary friend who becomes the real friend, and wow, he's like Cuba.
Yeah.
And she is like America. It's so interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yep, she's the first person. She was very on top of fashion. So she had a bob, and she's a flapper, she says. And so this is sort of her life, and she's living large.
Well, and I did say Midwestern earlier. I didn't know. upstate New York has a lot more in common with the Midwest than it does with Manhattan. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The snow belt, they call it.
It's more like Michigan than it is
Michigan
like
or the
Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
So she's going to be heading to New York soon and sort of unleashing some of this artistic energy that she has. But first is one of the most pivotal events in her life. And that is that her brother gets a 22 for his birthday. And they're in the backyard and her grandpa Fred is there. And there's a bunch of neighborhood kids. And they're shooting targets. And so her grandpa has everybody lined up on chairs and he's giving them instructions. You sit in the chair when it's not your turn. It's very important that you don't move. And there was a neighbor boy and his mom lived like a few houses down. And when she would yell his name, it was notorious. She'd yell his name, the whole neighborhood would hear, and he would just go running as soon as she yelled. Because if he wasn't there in a few seconds, she would beat him or, whatever was the case night. So she yells his name and he runs right in front of her brother as he's shooting. And he's shot and he ends up severing an area in his spinal cord. So he's paralyzed from the waist down. So the parents sue her grandpa and he is done working at this point. He's late in he's in his 60s. And so, he's worked factories, he's worked hard jobs, and this is the point where he's supposed to be done. He loses it. He tries to transfer the home into his daughter's names, but they end up suing a few times. So he goes to jail for a little bit and then he gets put in some sort of like, you can't leave the county sort of phase. But they lose all of their money. And so she has to, and the house gets sold. So her magical home, she has to leave.
All gone in like a second.
All gone in a second.
Yeah.
So around this time, her family is dispersed, and her parents, Ed and Dee Dee, get divorced. Her cousin Cleo, who was living with them, who was like the youngest sister figure, has to move out, and so they end up moving back to Jamestown at this point, I believe. And what's most important is that she just starts skipping school. She has to switch high schools. She is not with her friends. She doesn't like the new high school. And so she and Johnny just start going on road trips, basically. And so Dee Dee basically is getting a lot of flack from the community. Nobody wants their kids hanging out with Lucy. And so Dee Dee decides that if Lucy's going to run away, she might as well somehow point her in the right direction rather than have her sort of just run away with this older kid and have her ruin her life. So she enrolls her in the Robert Minton John Murray Anderson School of Drama. And she earns the money, scrapes it together, and sends her there. But when Lucy goes, she is terrified. She doesn't talk to anyone. She can barely get through a line. Betty Davis was in her class, and Betty was like the top of the class, and she's intimidated. And so after a few months, she gets sent home, and the instructor sends her mom a note and says that she would be wasting her money and that Lucy does not have a future in film.
Jeez.
Oh,
yeah, that hurts.
Wow, she's had a rough life.
Right?
Really has. Yeah.
Well, Lucy agrees with this assessment.
Yeah.
She's like, this is not for me.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But she didn't just go back to Jamestown and just like, all right, well, I'll just cut hair for the rest of my life or whatever.
Yeah. So the next 10 years, she is hard to keep track of because she is back and forth between Jamestown and New York City. I mean, almost constantly. And the big thing that kind of drove Lucy is that she had this homesickness. But then she also wanted to get out. So, she's kind of a little bit both. So she would be going to New York City, doing these jobs that were still in alignment with wanting to be somewhere in, film. And then going back to Jamestown when she got either sick or homesick. So I'm going to focus more on the New York City side of things just because that's what eventually gets her to Hollywood. So she decides she's got to get over this shyness. So she creates an alter ego and she decides to play that alter ego. So she is now Diane Belmont from Montana, which is where her parents had actually lived before they had her. So she's decided she's not totally lying. So Diane Belmont is auditioning for chorus lines. She would go to diners and she didn't have any money for food. She was still writing Johnny, and Johnny was sending her tons of money. I don't know where it was. I mean, $50, $100 week after week. She was living with people that they knew. And so she's using this for auditions. She would go to diners and she would watch people who were about to leave. And then when they would leave, she would slide into their seat and she would eat the rest of their donut and she would take the tip and then buy herself a coffee, while she took their newspaper and looked for auditions that she could go, or job opportunities.
It's a little bit of, now we got a little flim-flammery there.
Yeah.
Outright petty theft.
You don't get to the top without some flim-flam, Kevin.
No. Well, and of course there's that famous scene where she's eating the chocolate, stuffing the chocolate in her mouth, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Now, this is shades of that. She's sort of like hopping around, taking your interesting.
Yeah. So she gets a job at Hattie Carnegie's dress shop and as a model. And apparently she looked like one of the actresses at the time. And so they dyed her hair blonde because that actress would come in and shop there. So the more she looked like her, the more that, she could visualize the clothes on her. Hattie was very instructional to her and she was very helpful. She sounded kind of like a mother, like she, helped her along. She also would kick her in the shins. She said her shins were black and blue. She'd pinch her in the ribs if she wasn't standing the right way. And so during this time, but she's learning, she's committed and she's learning. And this is the thing about Lucy. She is hardworking and she is going to do whatever she needs to do to get the result that she wants. And so she's, taking it in and learning what she can from it. So she's dating a lot. She's with a bunch of other models. And so she's getting a lot of proposals. There's many men who are interested in her and she is just has no desire to settle down. She wants to make it big. And most of all, she wants to take care of her family. So she wants to be able to be the one to provide for the family, pull it all together, because there is no one now who can do that. So around this time, she gets her big break, and that is that she is asked to model for a Chesterfield ad. And the image that they take is with her and these two dogs, and it's striking, and it ends up going up on billboards and magazines. It's like the Chesterfield ad of the year. So when people see her, they sort of recognize her.
Cigarettes.
Yeah. The smoky flavor of Chesterfields. My doctor recommends Chesterfield for the T-zone. Yeah, I'm doing the impromptu. Yeah. Smoke Chesterfields. This woman is going to notice you,
right?
I mean, just go into the they live, right? Consume Chesterfields every day.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, you get it.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that I Love Lucy was sponsored by Philip Morris, but Lucille Ball continued to smoke Chesterfields her entire life. And the CEO of Philip Morris saw her smoking her Chesterfields and said, if she's going to smoke those cigarettes, can she at least put them in our box?
Yeah.
That is funny. Fun fact, my father, who happened to pass away when I was very young, so I feel sympathetic to Lucy and can relate to her idea of being driven by something like that. This podcast doesn't come out of nowhere. But my father worked for Philip Morris. He was a tobacco salesman in North Dakota, and we were getting checks from Philip Morris for years after he passed away.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They had some great, I don't even know how it all worked. It was some policy, but if you work for the devil will pay you.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And I also on the Bird website, sometimes come around to defend tobacco. I think tobacco is the backbone of America, to be honest. And I think when we got rid of cigarettes in public life, I think public life did decline. I think maybe it's better for overall health, but maybe not for mental health and our socializing. Real men smoke Chesterfield.
Right.
All right, I'm done. There you go. There's that weird connection. All right.
Right.
Although that's the competition. My father was a Philip Morris man, so I don't
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah. We don't want to talk. We don't want to big up Chesterfield.
But for real though, I mean, not to go too far out of left field, but I think we're getting into sort of that Mad Men era for these folks, right? A little before the swinging Mad Men thing really kicks off, but cigarettes were such an integral part of American life, and tobacco as a crop really was a huge part of the American story. And I think sometimes that's lost on us. And I mean,
and
even
TV was like financed partially by tobacco and then a few other products, right? So it's definitely it was.
I mean, Mad Men begins with the scene of Draper and the fellow, and he's asking him about his cigarettes and what would it get you to change and all the rest. So anyway, just a little bit of an aside. Very interesting, the Tobacco America connection. So okay.
So Lucy is at this point, while she now has been modeling and she's recognizable, someone, an agent from Paramount sees her and they say, hey, we need another girl. Somebody backed out to be in Roman Scandals as a Goldwyn girl. So this is her first break. She's on the streets of New York walking and she gets asked to go to Hollywood.
And to be a Goldwyn girl, that was to be like a dancer kind of in stage shows.
Yeah, I mean, there were a bunch of, different dancing lines and, sort of these groups of women. Now, Lucy was not very good at dancing or singing. However, Goldwyn Girls, was more about the costumes, more about, sort of the overall presence. There'd
be 50 of you on stage doing the same thing at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Entertainment was so different in that era, right?
Johnny, we're going to go out. We're going to look at some gams tonight. Here we go. Yeah, I can't wait to see some legs. Boy, we're going to see a lot of leg tonight. Yeah.
So, I mean, are either of you familiar with the poster or for Roman Scandals?
No.
So they dressed these women in nude. So they were supposed to look as if they were Roman and they were slave women. And so they wore nude bodysuits and they had these long wigs that covered areas to make them look like they were naked.
Oh my God.
Oh, I'm seeing it right now. This is what I think they would call in grad school problematic.
It is. It is problematic.
Yes. So that was Lucy.
They're chained up. They're chained up in this picture.
Chained up. And actually, I'll try and keep this short. The wig hair material was very cheap and they had these hot lights and it would fry up and melt in these lights. And they actually chained these women to this concrete thing that was up 20 feet. And it was at one point, Lucy fainted and she fell off of her chains down 15, 17 feet and somebody managed to catch her. But it was just grueling. I mean, it was grueling work. And what she loved about the film was that the film food, that's it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like the majestic kingly buffets of food was real food. And so they could eat, the Goldwyn Girls could eat all of that food. And that was like...
Now in the theater of the mind, I've pulled this up. It says Eddie Cantor. He's got a laurel. He's sort of all done up with like makeup and stuff. He's in like a green like Roman
toga?
Uniform. Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah, but something Roman. And then he's surrounded by maybe a dozen blonde-haired nude women, suggestive, and it says Roman Scandals in the Samuel Goldwyn production of Roman Scandals. If you get a chance to look this up, it's worth looking up. Fascinating. And you're telling me this is a film I can watch.
Right.
Okay, good to know. Taking notes. You got my strict, undivided attention.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The look on Eddie Cantor's face in that is pretty good on the poster. He seems... I don't know.
This would be a great poster if you found in the wild. You would buy this and frame it and put it up. Very amusing and kind of funny.
Yeah, looks like it defines an era in some way.
Old Hollywood.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So she's on her way to Hollywood to work on this. It is 1933. Brad, what's going on in Desi's life in 1933?
In 1933. He is literally fleeing Cuba as a refugee from the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, so it's very different. They're in very different spots right now in their lives.
Yeah, one's going up, one's going down.
One's going up, one's going down. So she's got her contract. It's creased because she's read it so many times on the train. And she decides when she shows up at Roman Scandals, she is not going to make the same mistake of being shy. So she's a little more confident in herself. And so they have to line up all these girls in the show line. And she takes this prank that she had seen another girl do where she took like tissue paper and she made it red and she put it all over her face to like look like the measles, which I guess people had all the time then. So she decides this will be funny. And so Eddie Cantor's walking the line to meet all the girls and to look them over. And she has these measles all over and he starts cracking up and he's like, that girl's hilarious. And so she gets this reputation for being funny, or at least for being up for things. And so she becomes the girl who is the beautiful girl who will hang out with all these other ones, but she'll take the mud pack in the face and she'll do the physical comedy that none of the other girls will do. And she is more than happy to do that.
Daddy issues.
I don't know.
Maybe a little bit. I don't know. We typically avoid the psychologizing, although when it comes time to do Freud and Jung, we're just going to be completely savage.
Yeah.
We're going to do to them what they did to us.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just interesting. And she sounds like she's hungry. She really wants it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay.
Willing to do what it takes. So during this time, she finally saves up enough. She has enough consistent business that she has an income, she has a contract, and she's ready to move her family out. So she sends for her brother Fred, her mom, and daddy, which is her grandpa, and she buys a house, and they all move out to live with her. So they're moving there. She's working a lot with Ginger Rogers and her mom, Leela. So Leela and Ginger Leela's kind of got like a pageant mom dynamic, but she was huge for helping people along. And Lucy says her career would have never happened had it not been for Leela. She taught her how to work with producers, how to work with directors, how to behave herself or conduct herself on sets. She really championed her when people said that they didn't think that they had the right type of role because people didn't really know what to do with her. She wasn't the best at any one thing. Mm-hmm. And so she was, they were trying to figure out what to do. And Leela saw something in her. And so she was a huge part in her life. And later she'll sort of pay that forward with younger actors and actresses. So right after they move out at 71, her grandpa has a stroke. And so around this time, he is becoming really passionate about the working class. He becomes a little hard to handle and a little, just tough for them to deal with. And he was going to the corner of their where they live. And there's the call ladies on the corner. And he's basically giving them all the money that they have and saying, here, honey, take the night off. And they take the money and they pocket it and they say thank you. And then they walk around the block and then they pick up the next guy. So they had to start giving him like a little bit of money so that he couldn't do this. But he's like a loving guy. He's a great guy, but he's just, they're kind of having to take care of him really actively. And he's getting very politically involved.
Grandpa has become a simp.
Yeah, he's a simp.
Yeah.
He's a simp. He's
like a socialist. He's a tanky simp.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And that would this would cause problems later.
I believe I can see. Yeah, you don't want to end up on the wrong side of McCarthy down the line.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my the last sort of grandpa stories, he was sitting in a rocking chair and they had a view of the mountains and he complained there was a tree that was in his way. The tree was parked on the median or between, the sidewalk and the road. So they kept telling him, we can't cut this down. And he was like, it's going to fall down in a rainstorm. You will see. So they have a light rain and this tree falls down. It falls right on Lucy's new Studebaker. And when they go out there, they see that someone has cut all of the roots around it and put the sod up over it.
Yeah.
Not an environmentalist.
No.
His father, okay.
He believed in direct action.
Yeah. Again. Okay. He wants a view.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Lucy did a lot of smaller stuff. We're not going to hit all of it, but she's doing a bit of everything. She's doing plays. She's doing movies. She's doing a lot of dating. She falls in love with a married producer who wants to marry her. And this ends up backfiring on her because a lot of people are like, you have to say yes to him. You should marry him. She loved him. She says no. And then he just blacklists her. And so this was an area that she's trying to sort of, get back into the right opportunities. And during this time, when the movies aren't going so well, she starts doing radio with Jack Benny. And that is one of the things she starts to learn from the most. So she watches how he gets responses from the audience, and she starts to learn how different facial features, different things you can do are going to elicit different types of responses, and how to get that laugh for the soundtrack. And so, she's learning from that, and then still doing movies and starting to have some more success there. She begins dating Al Hall, who I believe was a producer. He was divorced and 20 years older, and but it's not really going anywhere. And then during this time,
so she was dating a guy 20 years her senior,
20 years older. Yes,
I'm not going to say it.
I know you're going to say it.
Yeah, I'm just going to let it go. Let it go.
Okay. Desi is younger than her.
Desi is younger than her.
Yeah.
Okay.
As is her second.
See, and then okay, all right, okay. Yeah. I'm not judging. I'm just we're making radio here. Right. This is show business. Let's go in the spirit of the thing.
Yeah.
Boom chicka boom 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 chicka boom.
All right. So she's 28. I don't know how to wrangle you guys in.
Yep.
She's 28. She's about to meet Desi. We're about to, their stories are about to converge here. So she's being groomed to be an A-lister at this time. And so they've got publicity working with her, and she's sent out to New York for a film opening for one of her movies. And while she's there, they tell her to go check out Too Many Girls, because they know it's going to be a big show and they think that she might be good for it. So this is when it's still on Broadway. So she goes to check out Too Many Girls, but while she's in New York, she trips while ice skating, and she's got her knee all messed up. And so she's like not super mobile. And so she's at the show, and she sees Desi start laughing, and something magical happens. He makes her laugh, and she's like entranced by him. So afterwards, they ask where she wants to go out. And so she says La Conga, because she's hoping that she can meet him. He ended up being off that night, so they never met at that point. So she goes back to Hollywood, and she's cast in Dance Girl Dance, which is the show where she gets into the fight with Maureen O'Hara and meets Desi. And according to Lucy, once they finally went to dinner after he sees her in her normal clothes, she claims that she fell in love in 5 minutes.
Yeah. And they had it was excuse me, it was very kind of fast for both of them, right? So I think what it was 2 months after they met, they were married. Is that right? It's a very short period of time. Yeah, I think 2 months after they met, they got eloped, and
it's the only way to do it. Rip off the Band-Aid. Yep. If you're not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing to think about, and this is true for Lucille too. I mean, she was a beautiful woman, very attractive to a lot of people, very charismatic, and easy to go along with, and fun, and all of that. So she was very attractive and had a lot of suitors. But Desi had a lot too. He was this band leader guy. Lucy had kind of a thing for him before he even was aware of her, right? So he was constantly bringing women were constantly sort of in his life. And I think in that Home Movies documentary, Lucy Jr., Lucy and Desi's daughter, describes it as like, yeah, everybody wanted Desi, but my mom got him kind of situation, right? Like, and not just, as a semi-famous guy, or, he had his pick, and she had her pick too. So the fact that they kind of came together was kind of special. And the thing about them too is, so on the show on I Love Lucy, they're kind of this, part of the comedy of the show is she's, I don't know, Jolie, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the comedy of the show is that she's a little dumb. Would you say she's kind of dumb in the show? Is that fair? Or is it, maybe that's not the word. She's always got a plan that's clearly not going to work.
Is it more hapless? Would you describe her as hapless?
Maybe hapless.
Like harebrained.
Yeah.
Harebrained.
Yeah.
Endearing.
Right,
Endearingly.
But sweet, like, and he's kind of a typical guy, but he tolerates it, and he very much loves her, and she very much loves him, and that's kind of how the show is.
I just want to interject because I feel like this is a good moment for me to say I'm in my Conga Miami studio, and I have to go and get a cable for a technical reason. But I think as I go, it would be great if you two could you think of maybe like a top episode or a couple of episodes that I haven't seen. Talk amongst yourselves, and then I'll come back in like 2 minutes. I'm gotta go get this cable, or else we're gonna cut out. I'll be back.
Okay. You want us to talk about episodes?
Yeah, figure out an episode that you want to regale me with, because I do not know I Love Lucy at all, hardly at all.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'll be right back.
All right, we're going to conspire. So, I don't know, Jolie, what's an episode that sticks out for you? I've got a couple.
Well, I mean, I think that the Lucy has a baby, or I don't remember the exact title of it.
Yeah, Lucy goes to the hospital.
Yeah, Lucy goes to the hospital is a big one.
That's a big one. This tuna fishing one is hilarious, kind of hilarious to me. Though I don't think I've actually seen it. I did read about it, but it sounds hilarious.
Yeah, I don't remember that one that well. Did you see the loving cup one where she gets the trophy stuck on her head?
No. I don't remember
That's a good one. For some reason, I thought you were watching that with us.
No, I might. It doesn't ring a bell. There's the Bob Hope, the one where they go and sit by Bob Hope at the baseball game is quite hilarious. The one where she tries to be an undercutter with meat at the butcher shop.
That one's hilarious. That one's a good one.
All right, I'm back, and I was able to listen to you as I was.
Oh, okay.
Around, but I like that it immediately goes into the one where it's just like Seinfeld, the one where. Yeah, they're these simple concepts that they blow up into 20 minutes of hilarity.
And they're really fun. They're put together in a really funny way where you can kind of see where it's going to go wrong, but you're compelled. It's like there's
part of the humor is that you're ahead of it. You know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
You don't know how it's going to happen.
Right.
And you're gonna tell me about it.
So there's a great one where Lucy and correct me if I'm missing it, but the kind of the premise is that Lucy, she obtains a bunch of cheap meat or something. She gets like a good deal on meat, or I'm not sure exactly why she has all the
They get
meat.
a freezer, and she buys too much. She thinks that like a half a cow is
not that much meat.
Yeah, so they bring
So they have a bunch of meat in this freezer, and she doesn't want Desi to know that she's a lot of it. They
spend a ton of money on it.
Right. A lot of this stuff, because it's the early 50s. A lot of the humor comes from Lucy doing something that's a little, silly or whatever, and she doesn't want to get caught by Desi. Right. That's the whole. You got a lot of splaining to do. That's what it all comes from. Is she's frequently, she's getting hoodwinked by a vacuum salesman in one episode, which is pretty hilarious. But anyway, she buys all this meat and she's trying to get rid of it. So her and her friend Ethel go to the butcher shop, and they're trying to sell it to people like in the front door of the butcher shop. Right.
It's like they're selling loose cigarettes in front of us.
Right.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And then they bring it back, and they get it back in the freezer, and Desi wants to go down to the freezer, so she's got to put it someplace in the bottom of their apartment building. So she puts it in the furnace. Right? Isn't that how it works? She puts it in the furnace, and then at some point
she gets stuck in the freezer.
She gets stuck in the freezer. She gets locked into the freezer. And the reason that they come down and save her, I think, is because the furnace turns on, which heats the entire apartment building. And Fred, the neighbor, is like, "Oh, it smells like somebody's having a barbecue." And they run down and save her. Right. So there's always like a plot or calling it a scheme makes it sound sinister, but there's always like that's the right word.
Yeah, a scheme.
Yeah, yeah. And she's frequently in costume. She's there was an episode where the neighbors, Fred and Ethel, are like the counterpoint, and they're in every episode basically. And there's an episode where the two men, Desi and Fred, who are good friends in the show, and Ethel and Lucy, who are also good friends, they pit against each other. They bet on who can catch the largest tuna, right? And they're out fishing, and they both catch a big tuna. But then the problem is they realize that they're not paired up very well, because either way, if you win the bet, you got to pay out, right? Like your husband or your spouse is on the other team, so there's like no way to win this bet. Basically, is the thing. So they bring these two huge tunas to hide them from each other back, and they put them in the bathtubs of the respective apartments, and there's just like a whole sneaking around of like running to the other tub, and the tuna's there, but you think it's your tuna, and it's just like this comedy of errors running between hallways.
Seems to be a lot of anxiety around protein in these episodes. It's true to life, and people have anxiety about where you're going to get your protein.
Right. Well, we'll get to a couple other episodes as we get, because we're not quite at the I Love Lucy.
Okay, I didn't mean to, but this is great. So they've met, and okay, very good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, so they've met. They're married. I'm talking about the relationship. I wanted to just fully I want to lay out what the relationship was like. So
yeah, they're not married. I mean, well, I can kind of talk about what goes into them getting married. I can do it kind of briefly.
Okay. Yeah.
So they go out to El Morocco in New York, and they decide, are we going to be together? Or are we not? And they decide that night that they cannot be together. She's bothered that he's younger than she is. And he wants to marry somebody who's Catholic, or he wants his mom's going to want to.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah. I was getting at that because she is not a member of the one true faith.
Right.
So it's very important that right.
And she wasn't really particularly convicted about anything in life. So she wasn't really, strong in one religion or, political party, anything like that. So she leaves for a Midwest tour, and Desi's just, they decide they're not going to be together. You'd think that they had broken up, and he's calling her more than ever. So she does a interview with magazine about why I will always be a bachelor girl, says she's never going to marry. And he calls her and says, we're eloping tonight. So she said,
he said that journalist was going to have a real problem with that story. Right.
Yeah.
I think is what he said.
Hasn't even been published yet.
Yeah.
So, they go to Connecticut, they get married, and her mother and her friend and maid, Harriet, who worked with her or for her for 28 years, hear the news on the radio. And so they've been married for about 2 minutes, and the fighting begins. Desi's very old school. He's very possessive. And she needs to go get on a taxi. He says, no wife of mine is going to take a taxi around New York. And she said, you sure are possessive as hell all of a sudden. And she said that her friends gave the marriage 6 months, and she gave it a week.
Wow.
Ooh. These are very interesting people.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just, and showbiz relationships they're wild. I have some friends who are actors, and I don't know how well he's doing a show in DC. She's going to be in a different state for months.
Yep.
And it's not easy. And for people who make that work, there has to be a real bond. And I respect people who can make it work, but it's just not a normal lifestyle. It's just not. It's not like the guy has the 9 to 5 and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and their relationship was much like that too. They would spend a lot of time apart because they were working on different projects. She was on different shows than him, but they were. This is the other thing about it. So they were both like madly in love with each other, in almost a storybook kind of way. But they were also both insanely jealous. So their relationship early on is happening mostly over the phone, and a lot of it is just accusing each other of sleeping with people. Right. So like an example is like, well, and Desi probably is the thing, but it's not clear, who exactly and when exactly. But he's at a show, and he'll be in a show with girls dancing on stage. So of course Lucy's getting jealous about that.
Too many girls.
That's how he met her, right? So and then she's doing shows, and she's on screen, and there's articles written about her and things. And there's one time she's doing some kind of event in Milwaukee, I think it is. or Kansas City. It might be Milwaukee. Anyway, she's there for a couple of days, and there's a photograph in the newspaper of her with the young, handsome mayor of that city. And she ends up staying there a few days. And Desi calls her up and like accuses her of sleeping with this mayor just because there's a photo of her with him. Like neither of them. Yeah.
Newspapers were the original social media.
Yeah, well, that's true.
You think about Twitter. Twitter is just an interactive tabloid. Things have not changed as much as we think.
No. But, their early relationship was a lot of this, like not actually being together, a lot of, to be generous about it. It's a lot of anxiety about losing the other person, right? To put it not so generous, it's a lot of just like out and out jealousy. And, they'd call up and they'd have these terrible fights. There's this great anecdote he tells about, he, I think, is in a hotel. I can't remember exactly where they were, but just imagine they're both all over the place all the time early on in their relationship, right? As he's trying to do his thing and she's trying to do her thing. They would have so many phone calls, and back then you had an actual operator make your connections, right? Like there was a middle point where there was actually a human between two ends of the phone, and either he was in a hotel or she was in a hotel, but anyway, the operators would listen in on their phone calls, especially as time went on. They were becoming more and more well known, right? Lucille was becoming the queen of the B movies. This is all through the 40s, and Desi's becoming quite well known as a band leader and all of these things. And they would have a fight, accuse each other of terrible things, say terrible names, and then they would hang up. And then a few minutes later, one or the other of them would call back, right? And say, I'm sorry what I said, I love you, baby, all that kind of stuff, and try to make up. Now, one time they had this argument and that didn't happen. The other one didn't call back, right? So some amount of time passes, 10 minutes pass, 15 minutes pass, and the operator calls Lucy and says, Lucy, you got to call him back. He feels terrible right now.
You're kidding.
Just call him back. Tell him you love him. It's all going to be okay.
That is hilarious. Right? It's like a soap opera that's playing out, and this poor operator is listening. Can you believe this? Yeah. Right. You two belong together.
Right.
One thing I've noticed with these two is that they both came from this really disrupted adolescence and childhood.
Yeah.
There was a lot of upheaval.
Right.
So you could see that show business and the moving around and everything might be where they feel at home.
Right. Yeah. I think it makes you feel like that's natural, but then also, you're also missing out on sort of the other half of life,
right. And then it would be natural that the show then would be this sort of send up of married, happy married life.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of move into that, because I guess we're getting into that period. Lucille Ball's making movies. I think I read that by 1950 she had been in 60 movies.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. And
whoa.
Yeah. She was the queen of the B movies. That's what they called her, right? So she never had a starring role in a big successful, film that people really remember now, but she had a range of size of parts in a lot of movies, obviously.
Just a working actor. Yeah. I'll show up on the set, I'll do whatever you want, I'll read the lines and pay me. And she's a studio gal, right? I mean,
everyone's contracted. Yeah. So that she just took her salary.
Yeah, she was contracted to RKO. And was it RKO when she did The Big Street?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was her attempt at sort of a breakout role. She starred in this film called The Big Street with Henry Fonda, and it was a kind of an acclaimed performance. It was more of a dramatic performance. She plays like I think she becomes disabled in the movie, or she plays a disabled character who's in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I think I don't remember when it happens, but for the majority of the film, she's in a wheelchair. She's
right. So
a terrible person.
Right. And she's the character is a terrible. Yeah. And so it was a great performance that many people respected, but it didn't make any money, right? It wasn't a hit. And so she gets let go of her RKO contract. And then, things are very disrupted. Desi had made an attempt to have a film career, and after Too Many Girls, it kind of fizzled out. He spent some time in the army, or he spent some time in the military in World War II, but he didn't see any combat or anything. But that was a stressor on the relationship.
They'd also had their first miscarriage.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
in 1942.
1942, they had a miscarriage, which was hard. And then 1944, just after Desi got out of the military, Lucy filed for divorce. Right. So this is, I Love Lucy. The show doesn't start until 19 in the early 50s. 1944, she files for a divorce. And basically there was something in California law at that time where if you had knowledge of each other, let's call it, in the first year of that period, your divorce was null and void. Right. Something like it didn't finalize or something like this.
Wait, so if you are divorced, but then you do the conga within a year after, boom, chicka, boom, boom.
Yeah.
If you do that within a year after, the divorce didn't take.
Something like that. Yeah. And I don't know
that is wild.
Right.
That is what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just more like a cooling off period. Like it's more just like we're going to leave this period of time so that nobody changes their mind. I don't think people were breaking into people's bedrooms and trying to catch them in the act.
Right.
Darn.
Right.
And that would be a great episode of I Love Lucy. Is it just me or does it smell like tuna in here?
Right.
Oh boy. I'm talking about the episode with the fish.
Yeah, right.
The tuna.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But so she tried to do that, and literally, I think it was like the morning she was going to go to court to do like the next phase of paperwork. The night before, he took her out, and they had a lovely romantic evening that ended the way many of their evenings in person ended.
So these are not actor types who are capable of keeping the drama on stage. These are people whose lives are kind of a mess, even while they're being. Yeah.
I'd say that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. They were passionate people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. They had feelings, and they weren't afraid to show them. And I guess now we can maybe talk about why. Oh, there's a bit to show you how hard this relationship was to maintain, and then we'll talk about the advent of I Love Lucy. There was a bit when they were living in California where she's reporting to RKO at 6 o'clock in the morning. I think she had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And they had this ranch. Is this when they had the ranch, the whole meeting at the top of the hill thing, Jolie?
Yeah, they had a ranch in the San Fernando Valley. It was called Desi Lou, and it was about 45 minutes from where all of the filming would be and where Desi would do his short shows. Yeah,
so there was a thing where he was playing shows at night at a nightclub, and she had to report at 6 a.m, right? And he's playing until 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or whatever. And so the only time that they would spend in the day is on this hill that was part of their mutual commute. They would meet on this hill, and they would hang out for a minute and have a kiss and have a cigarette and check in with each other. And then he'd go home and pass out, and she'd go into work for the day.
Wow.
So there's an extended period of time where that was their life. And Desi, also when Desi wasn't working, Desi was partying. He was out on the town. He, may or may not have been involved with a number of women. Who knows exactly when and how and who, but there was definitely some stepping out. Drinking, and he likes to gamble. He wasn't curtailing any of that behavior either. So not only are you not even, you're on radically different schedules, you've got radically different lifestyles you're trying to live at the same time. So, So, and then in what year was Lucy Lucie born, Jolie?
Yeah, so she's gonna be born in a little bit. They find out they're pregnant with her once they've already got I Love Lucy arranged.
Oh, that's right. So anyway, kind of quick story on how I Love Lucy comes to be. Lucille was in a show called My Favorite Husband, a radio show called My Favorite Husband, and it was quite popular. They wanted to turn it into a TV show with the male co-star of My Favorite Husband. What was his name?
Richard Denning.
Richard Denning. Right. So, and with another actor. And Lucille said she didn't want to do it unless Desi could be the husband, could be the My Favorite Husband.
See, this is interesting because we're back to the imaginary friend being made real, but it's the other way around. We have the real husband being made into the imaginary husband.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And they, there were a few reasons for doing it. One, she wanted to keep an eye on him and she didn't want him working somewhere else.
Yep.
Two, she wanted to actually get pregnant and they couldn't do it when they were living in different places. So she kind of wanted to have like her family and like all together and her career. And this whole thing is like, do I pick my career or my family? And ultimately she ended up picking her career the whole time.
Yeah.
But this was her way of trying to kind of have it all, which she eventually got.
Yeah. 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 And now that doesn't sound like a big deal, right? You've got, she wants her husband to be in it. Great. He's a guy with some acting experience and, he's not just a rando off the street. We can do it. Problem is, he's a Cuban with a thick Cuban accent, and she's an all-American blue-eyed girl, and it's 1950. Right, so that's a tough pill to swallow for producers, for sure. Now, the way that because of this resistance, Lucy and Desi kind of came up with this idea. Well, we'll do some shows, some stage shows, and we'll show them how much people like this. So they kind of incorporated her into Desi's touring band act, and did like little vaudeville skits in between songs. And she would sing and dance and do clown bits and all of it. And they got to show off their chemistry, and people loved it. So that convinced the producers that putting Desi on I Love Lucy was a good idea.
That's so funny because it's the producers who are racist.
Right.
It's not the audience.
Not the audience, right?
The producers have an idea. So maybe that tells you something about the producers and their projection of the idea of things. And that goes on to this day.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, there's people craved it. And you gotta admit, they did a show with a Cuban guy and a blue-eyed American woman, and it was a massive hit, right? Like audiences loved it. So where are the producers getting this idea that we can't do that, right?
Interesting.
Like, they're coming up with it's in their own head. It bothers them. Yeah. So now we're kind of in the I Love Lucy era.
I just have one thing real quick. So while they were on that tour for vaudeville, their apartment that they were staying in was robbed. And so the police came and they're looking. She had a 42-carat aquamarine wedding ring and it was stolen. And when she realized it was stolen, she threw up in the bathroom. So the next day she took a pregnancy test, but she used her hairdresser's name because at the time the press was monitoring pregnancy test results to find out who is pregnant and post it. And so the next day she was listening to Walter Winchell and somehow they had managed to figure out it was her. And she found out that she was pregnant on the radio.
Wait. How are they able to monitor pregnancy tests? What is this?
Because it's 1949.
Oh, man. Right. So you would have to go into the hospital. You're an A-list celebrity. You're a household name, right? And so they're going to monitor and they're going to say you're knocked up. Wow.
I bet you the nurses did more of the reporting out than anybody had to do effort to get them.
Right.
They probably
would get, $20 or whatever for any good information. Yeah.
Ooh,
well, and it's funny. There's a funny story, and this tells you how much this and the operator story, right? It tells you how much this relationship between them wasn't just theirs in a way, right? Their whole family, the boundaries between their family and the rest of the world's kind of blurry. And the I Love Lucy just makes that worse. There is a funny story though about Walter Winchell, who was like the voice of the news at that time. When they reported it, Desi said, well, Walter's saying it must be true.
Hi, I'm Walter Winchell for Chesterfield, and I'm here to report that Lucille Ball is pregnant.
Right. That's a fact.
We'll be back. Yeah. What a world. Right. It's so funny because doing this show, you go, so much has changed, so little has changed.
Right.
here we are trapped in this popular loop.
Yeah, for sure. And the I Love Lucy thing, it's interesting because it's a bit of a gamble. It's very early TV days. Like, I don't think it's possible for anybody who's, our generation or even a little older. I think it's very difficult to understand what TV was in the early 50s. Not that many people even had television, right? Nobody really understood what the medium even was, right? Like, is this a fluke? Is it a fad?
They're doing variety shows. They're trying to figure out what works.
Right. And nobody really knows, and Lucy at that time, she had good success in the B films, right? She'd had a good career, but she's starting to get a little bit older. And so that star's kind of fading, right? She gets let go from RKO after The Big Street. And her star's it's kind of over. And so I don't want to say over. It's not like she would have never gotten a role again, but it started making the move to television started to seem like maybe it was something you could do, right? It even though an agent might try and talk her out of it, it wasn't ridiculous. Though, 5 years earlier, it would have been unheard of for somebody like her to have done to make that move.
So this is a period where to go to television would have seemed to be almost like a retreat.
Yeah.
You're being sent to pass. And there was a period where that was the case too. In the 80s,
mm-hmm.
there was a stink on television. You weren't, it wasn't movies. Of course, now that's been flipped, but
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I can't help trying to express the phenomenon that the show would become. So, and we're going to talk more of the technical business side and what's going on in their personal lives through this somewhat. But the one thing I just tried to get across to people, how big of a deal this was, how big of a deal this show was. It was such a big deal that department stores started closing at airtime of I Love Lucy. Like Marshall Fields and Macy's would close at 9:00 on Monday because that's when I Love Lucy came on the air.
Wow. Nobody has a VCR. Nobody's recording this.
Can't record it. There were, municipal water departments would see a dip in how much water needed to be provided. Things like that, right? Like it was like a civic level event every Monday. Right?
Wow.
The most popular episode of I Love Lucy was watched by 44 million people.
Get out.
Okay. This is at a time when there was 195 million people in the country. So literally as a ratio, more people watched this episode of I Love Lucy than watched the Super Bowl.
It's just like that YouTube video said. This is the satanic Hollywood elite planting their Luciferian. I'm kidding. That's amazing.
Right.
More people watch. Yeah. Right. 44 million. It's like 1 out of every 5.
It's like 1 out of 5 people watched it.
Yeah.
And now we have basically 100% TV households have TVs, basically. Right. Back then, it was not 100%. I think it was 40 to 50% of.
So it was an event. Aired. You would go over to your uncle's, or you would. Yeah. Wow.
Sure. Yeah. And everybody watched it. If you had a TV, you watched it. And part of it, definitely part of it was there wasn't as many options for sure. But at the same time, people absolutely loved this show. It was an event. They saw themselves in it. They aspired to it. They, everything. It meant a great deal to many people.
When we take over politically, we're going to go back to this and recreate a monoculture. You're going to need a license to podcast. This is going to be in the Art of Darkness Reich. There's going to be 3 podcasts airing consecutively, and we'll be one of them.
Right. And then, everyone will have to listen to those.
It's incredible to think, though, how different that was from where we are now, where there's choice is too much choice.
It's almost too much choice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jolie, I think maybe you've got some things about kind of Lucille's life during this time, during the actual time of the show of I Love Lucy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most relevant, is probably things are going well. She has, do you want to jump to, I mean, she has another baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can kind of hit on that and then we can backtrack into some of the other technical pieces.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
um, in May 1952, she finds out that she's pregnant again, and they assume that the show's over. And so they let Jess Oppenheimer, who was the head writer of the show, they're like, look, we're done. And so he's like, why are we done? Why don't we try it? So they pitched it to CBS, and I don't remember exactly. So CBS was on the fence. Philip Morris was not on board. They said nobody's going to want to be able to accept that somebody's pregnant on TV. And this was like the moral side of things. Like, you can't show a pregnant woman on TV.
Yeah.
So they ended up having a team of 3 religious people come in and read every single script. So it was a rabbi, it was a Catholic priest, and then do you remember what the third, Brad?
There's a rabbi. Yeah, I'm not sure. There was a Catholic priest or a rabbi, and
member of the Satanic Temple.
There you go, Kevin.
It was Anton LaVey. It was Aleister Crowley himself came and approved. I saw it on the YouTube. No. I bet it was probably a Protestant minister.
I think it was a Protestant minister or somebody from the ecumenical council or something. But yeah, three major religious leaders. Yeah.
Again, it sounds like a joke.
Yeah, right? I know. And I guess that they all became friends and they would go to lunch and just talk shop, like religious shop while they were at lunch, which is very charming.
I really like that idea. It would almost be like a cool sitcom in and of itself. The religious advisors to a show, hanging out. Yeah, there is something charming about that for sure.
So they actually, so they ended up saying, yes, you can do it, but you can't say pregnant on TV. So they called it Lucy is expecting, which was funny because Desi couldn't say expecting, so it was expecting.
Yeah.
And so that was how they referred to it. And they did a whole season with her pregnant. And so a couple things came in kind of magically alchemied into this sort of event that was huge, which is one, her C-section, her doctor. So she had a C-section with Lucy, so she had to have one with Desi Jr. So he did them on Mondays, and the show aired on Mondays. So the only thing that they didn't know is if it was a girl or a boy. So they picked boy for the TV plot, and they ended up having a boy. And it turned out that more people watched the birth of little Ricky, Desi Jr., than the inauguration of Eisenhower the following day. So she now has 2 kids, and she's pregnant on the show. First woman to ever be at this level in comedy, first person to be pregnant on the show. And so the big piece, the big other hallmark event in her life at this time is the communist scare. So Grandpa Fred's, sort of efforts are now coming full circle. So do you want me to jump into those, Brad?
Yeah, let's talk about that in a second. One thing I want to talk a little bit about the birth of it's Desi Jr. in real life and Ricky on the show. Kevin, you brought up a good point. As the producers push back on something and the audience ends up loving it. It was the same with this. The producers pushed back. We can't have a pregnant woman on TV. That's scandalous, right? And they were making, and they're trying to figure out how to keep the show going. Desi has this sensibility of what do you mean? It's a show about a family. What do families do? They have kids. What are you talking about? We can't have a pregnant woman on TV.
The good Catholic man, and he's
right. Yeah,
he's 100%
he's right. That's what a family's for. Everybody knows what a family's for.
Yeah, what are we hiding here?
Right.
Yeah,
right. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of touch, and then there was that sort of magic of them guessing. Just we're going to make, for the sake of the show, we're going to call it a boy because we got to record this before we broadcast it, and then her actually having a boy basically at the exact same time that the show is being aired. There's this kind of blurring of real life and the TV show for sure. So on the show, everybody, the day after the show, everybody's waking up like, oh my God, did you see I Love Lucy last night? Yeah. And she actually had a boy. Like, it's very,
it's like this magical event. And again, going back to that imaginary friend, the real friend, this weird blurring of realities. It reminds me a little bit of Disney, where he animated himself into or mixed the animations with the real world. There's that kind of that strange thing. I do wonder, to be sympathetic to the producers, I do wonder if there was a sense of not wanting to be exploitative, possibly, about the child.
That might have been, and I don't know that we have access to the exact conversations. I mean, in the movie, so there's a film right now out, biopic by Aaron Sorkin, called Being the Ricardos. It just came out last month. I would say it's pretty good.
Do they talk really fast and have monologues as they're wandering down hallways trying to solve their problems?
They do a few times. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. And I bet they solve their problems and in the end learn a lesson.
Yeah, there's a lesson learned at the end. Yeah.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, we watched it. Julie and I watched it. Yeah.
Great writer. The Social Network is one of the greatest films ever made.
Yeah, and it was quite good. Nicole Kidman was an interesting choice to play Lucille Ball. Javier Bardem plays Desi Arnaz. Doesn't look like him at all, but does a phenomenal job, I thought.
Wow, how did this fly under my radar? I had not even heard about it.
You have too many options. We've lost the monoculture, Kevin.
Right. Well, we're part of darkness. We are bringing back the monoculture.
Yeah. If 17 people watch something now, it's a hit. It used to be.
Don't give away our numbers, Brad. Don't lift the skirt, buddy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch on that, and then now in this cultural milieu, we also have it's the McCarthy era. We have the Red Scare going on, and that does not leave the Arnazes unscathed. So. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1952, the FBI had talked to Lucy about possible communist connections, and this was a little bit before things got nuts. And she told them what she knew. She had been registered as a communist because her grandpa had a friend who was running for city council on the communist ticket. And all he wanted was for people to vote for his friend. So to make him happy, this is after a stroke, she, her mom, her brother all signed up a communist. She never actually ended up voting at all for his family friend because she had to work that day.
Yeah, she had registered as a communist, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
For that election.
Yeah.
That is the most ironic way to miss your vote as a communist, is because you're at work.
Right?
I have to labor today, so I cannot go and vote for the Party of Labor.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this was a year ago, so she thought this was over. And this was right after she'd won 2 Emmys in 1953, one as Best Comedy Actress and one for the Best Comedy Show. And so one of the things about Lucy is every time something's going well, she's convinced that something terrible is about to happen. So this is the thing. So she gets this call from William A. Wheeler, who's the investigator for the House Un-American Activities Committee, and asks for a closed meeting with her brother, and her mom. So they're opening this all up again, and she's, said it's cleared, but it's obvious that they're not okay with that. So this is when she's about to start filming I don't know if it was the 2nd or the 3rd season, but they're about a week away. So she's at home, and if you watch the movie, a lot of it takes place between Monday and Friday. So the thing about I Love Lucy was that their production schedule, it was basically a live show every Friday. And Brad, you'll get into this and how it was produced. But on Mondays, they would start rehearsals, and on Friday, the audience would come in and they would do the show and they would film it. So there's this whole week as it unfolds, and she hears Walter Winchell while listening to the radio again. This is just the story of her life. Which top redheaded television comedian has been confronted with her membership in the Communist Party? So the big thing here is that it doesn't really matter whether or not she did or didn't, right? At this point, once she becomes blacklisted and Hollywood doesn't think that she's going to be successful, that can be it. And that is what they had seen a lot of. And so this just keeps spiraling. The news medias keep picking it up, and they're hoping it'll blow over because they've been told by the FBI and the House Un-American Activities Committee that she's fine. And so on Thursday, it hits the New York Journal, and on Friday, the LA Herald Express prints a front page ad with 3-inch headline, Lucille Ball named red. So they think that the show's done for the second time. First time was her pregnancy. This time it's for real. So they don't know how the show's going to go. It's a few hours before the show, and it's going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to hold a press conference during that time and just talk about what happened, or they're going to do the show as planned. And they basically needed to make sure that the audience was bought in to whatever was happening. So Desi, they were hoping that it would come from the government, that they didn't need to be the ones to try and convince anyone. So Desi ends up demanding that it be addressed, and California State Rep Donald Jackson holds a press conference at his house at 6 p.m. I don't remember if the show started filming at 7 or at 8. And so Desi says, he's the one who got the crowd going. He was very, he kind of treated it like his nightclub. So he comes out to the audience. He says, Lucy's been cleared. And what they really said about this whole thing, many people have said that they really they were trying to find a model that they could bring down. And they kind of ended up picking the fight with the wrong person. She was too beloved. And people couldn't assume anything bad about her. And so it really did end up kind of quieting down this entire Hollywood red listing effort. And so just wanted to read a quick quote from Jack Gould of the New York Times. He said, "The courteous and fair treatment which she has been accorded should not be unique, but rather should become standard for cases of this kind. Broadcasting should study Miss Ball's case to see whether it does not provide a formula for handling its loyalty problem with far more maturity and equity than previously have been displayed. The procedure that is available to the biggest stars should also be available to the bit player in similar trouble."
Yeah. They picked on the wrong tuna.
They did. Well, they did. It's people loved her. There were people who said, there were everyday people who said, like, well, if she's a communist, I'm moving to Russia. Right. Like, so people loved her too much. And then the accusation was too thin. And what ended up being that she just signed a thing to make her grandpa happy. Right.
Yeah,
So
even her brush with the red menace had this quality of Americana and family, and Grandpa's sipping for the quarter girls, and I'm just trying to make my grampy happy.
Just trying to put a smile on his face before he passes off this earth. What's more wholesome than that? So so it didn't work for a number of reasons. But you got to think too. You've got Desi in there, whose life had been ruined by communism. Right. I think he was probably furious at the accusation, right? Because in a way, there's nobody more American than Desi Arnaz in terms of our mythos as a country, So yeah, it's kind of a crazy moment, really.
I think it's so interesting because we're still talking about these things like equity, and there are witch hunts still now. Again, things change, everything stays the same.
Yeah, for sure. And the sides flip flop sometimes and all of that.
Did she have to put up a fight, Jolie, or was it more that the industry behind her backed her? Do we have those?
It's interesting that you ask that, because this is where the dynamic of her and Desi really, I think, becomes succinct. I mean, he was the one who fought for her, and he did in many different areas. And it wasn't like he had to. He's putting effort in it, but he just kind of had it handled. Yeah. He knew the right people, he knew what to do, and he had that determination, and he got it done. And that was one of the things that I think she loved about him the most.
Yeah. Well, this ties into what we're going to talk about. I think I'll segue into talking about the technical brilliance of I Love Lucy from a production standpoint for a little bit. But this is a good segue talking about how Desi's kind of handling this thing. Going back to the pregnancy thing, when the producers didn't want to do it, part of the way they convinced them part of the way that Desi and Lucy convinced the producers that it was okay to do is they were making a lot of money right, for CBS and for their advertisers and that kind of big hit. And so Desi basically wrote a letter to or telegram or whatever to the head of I think it was either the head of CBS or the head of Philip Morris. I think it might have been the head of Philip Morris. Oftentimes these shows were supported by one or two advertisers, right? And he basically said, okay, if you're going to tell us we can't do this, that's fine, but we ask that if you're going to tell us what we can't do, that from now on you tell us everything that we have to do, that we should do. Like basically, okay, if you're not going to let us do this, then you have to write the show for us, right? It was like a throwing down a thing. It was basically saying like, we've made all of this money for you, and if you're going to tell us we can't do this, then it's your show now. You tell us what to do, and then we're going to do that, right? That's not going to work. It was a gamble, right? And then the letter came down from, I think it was the head of Philip Morris to the CBS producers that said, agreed to let them do the pregnancy thing and said, don't F with the Cuban. Don't mess with this guy, right? He's going to outwit you.
This guy brought the Conga line to the United States.
Yeah,
he's a force.
Yeah, don't mess with him. He knows exactly what he's doing. And so now I want to kind of talk about the technical aspects of I Love Lucy, because actually I do think it's kind of important to the whole story, right? So there's a couple of things that start going on at the start of I Love Lucy, just from a production standpoint. So all TV was being filmed in New York City at that time. And the reason for this is because you went live. You went live with electronic cameras. And to film something and then the rest of the country, for the sake of, you couldn't, there were no like internet, there were no like cross-continental cabling. So what would happen is you'd film something live on with an electronic camera, and then you would take what's called a kinescope, and then you would deliver the kinescope to broadcast centers in other parts of the country, and then broadcast them from there. The quality on the kinescope was a lot lower, so oftentimes you would see TV live in New York, and then you'd see it later in, say, California, and it would be at a lower kind of degraded quality. So the idea was you had to live in New York and film and shoot in New York.
Yeah, if you watch like The Honeymooners, it's like that.
The quality's terrible. Yeah. Because you're watching.
I had no idea.
You're watching a copy of a kinescope.
I had no idea that they were in New York City recording this.
They weren't. They weren't.
Okay.
This is part of the deal. Yeah. They were living in California when the show started, and they said, "No, we have to figure out how we can stay in California and do this show." So Desi said, "Well, we'll put it on film. We'll shoot it on film." Now, the distinction at that time, you still can't. You can't shoot something on photographic film and send it out live, right? It just didn't work that way. You got to edit it and all of these things. Now, so he was like, "Okay, well, we'll film it. We'll shoot it on film." Okay, well, the problem with that is if we film it, you got to do it in a studio in controlled conditions, and Lucy needs an audience to make her magic, to make the Lucille Ball magic. What you need is an audience there that she feeds off of. That's very important. That's how she becomes Lucy, right? Is by having an audience. So, okay, now this is a whole new problem. We've got to have an audience. And people have never really shot film in front of an audience. You got to light it. You got to move cameras around. You got to put cameras in the way. You got to do close-up shots. It's a really challenging technical problem. So then Desi's like, okay, well, we'll figure out how to do that too. Desi brings in, so they're going to do the first time ever you're going to film in front of a film, as opposed to an electronic camera, in front of a live audience, and then you're going to edit it all together later and send that out as the show.
Okay. I Love Lucy is filmed live in front of a what do you say? Is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah,
right. Of course.
Wow. Desi invented that at the moment, so he could stay in California. Now
he's still doing a conga line. That's that same energy where we have to have people in the room. We got to work the crowd. They're still working the crowd.
Right. And the whole okay, we'll just figure out how to do it, and we'll figure it out right now. We'll set ourselves up a huge problem, and we'll figure it out as we go. Right?
Running over those. We got to break those tiles, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I kind of want to. Why this is important to the story. And so So to try and figure out this technical problem, he brings in Carl Freund. Now, nobody knows who that guy is anymore, but early on, he was the most talented cinematographer and most innovative cinematographer. He invented what they called the unchained camera. He's the first guy who figured out how to film while you're moving a camera. He literally like figured out the technology behind that. He invented the light meter, so you could determine if your lighting was good in a particular scene. He shot Metropolis, Fritz Lang's, he shot Fritz Lang's M, right? Like he's a big deal, right?
Okay.
Desi gets him involved, and they sort of invent a bunch of stuff to do this. They're shooting everything all the time on 3 different cameras. So you have a close-up camera, a wide shot camera, and another camera that you can use for mid shots and different kinds of shots that you might need. You're shooting the whole thing at the same time and then editing it later. Desi and Carl, with the help of the company that made the camera, they actually invented a whole new unit for editing, so they could watch all three reels of footage and cut it all together at the same time. They called it the 3-headed monster. Desi didn't invent it, but he conceptualized it.
It's another satanic reference, man. You got the Hound of Hell there. This YouTube video, my mind is exploding with all the synchronicities here. I don't think what you're doing. I'm going to cross myself and go to mass tomorrow.
You should. It's Sunday. You should.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
They also invented most of the time film cameras. You'd put them on a track. Mm-hmm. They came up with the idea of putting them on omnidirectional rollers and putting in a really smooth floor so that you could just move the cameras in and out silently and steadily all the time. They invented lighting tricks so that you could light for close, medium, and wide shots almost simultaneously. They had to control the lighting set so much and contrast so much so that you could light it properly for all 3 of them at the same time. That things like, if they had a prop newspaper, that newspaper the paper itself would be gray so that the white of it wouldn't over contrast with other things and screw up your lighting situation, right? So they were solving a million technical problems to put out this, what seems like a dated sitcom to us now. And these techniques, this ball of techniques all put together, became known as the Desi Lou technique, and was basically adopted by all other television studios very shortly after.
Wow.
And because of the success of it and how well and this is one other thing, because of all of this, it was the most expensive TV show to make at the time. It was like $6,000, $5,000 or $6,000 more to make an episode of I Love Lucy than, say, The Honeymooners or some other sitcom that was on at the time. CBS didn't want to pay for that. Desi said, well, you know what? We'll front that other $5,000, but in exchange, we want to have ownership of the actual film. We want to own our masters, right? The CBS said, who cares? Who wants film?
Once again, like Prince, we're going back to that.
Yeah,
he's the Purple Rain. I made that reference. That's a very smart move.
That
is a big move.
It made them and it contributed to them being millionaires later and literally buying RKO Studios, the studio that they'd both been fired from in the 40s.
You're kidding me. Yeah. I didn't know that they bought that studio. That is hilarious. Yep. Good for them.
Well,
good.
And then
Hit them.
Yeah.
The other thing to call out with the reruns or the tape is that the way to make the pregnancy season work was to play reruns. Mm-hmm. So that's how they had it, so that she was having the baby on the same night. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, there were like 3 times as many households with televisions between their first season and their second season. So they became immediately useful in terms of people who had never seen I Love Lucy, didn't even know that they were reruns, or weren't able to watch the first season, being able to see it.
Yeah. They invented the rerun. Right. And also another thing that they could do is because they owned the film, and before you didn't really keep this stuff. You kept a kinescope, which was low quality, was kind of poor quality. Now you have film. Now you can re-edit stuff. So they could later do compilation episodes where instead of filming a whole new show, the episode is the four main characters reminiscing about an old episode, and you can cut it in, right? You can repurpose these things and turn them into another episode.
That reminds me, we don't do anything like that, do we, Brad? That reminds me, we've got some good stuff. We're going to do another Joyce episode with Aaron Gwynn. That episode is going to be called Rejoice. And then I think you and I are going to do one where we reflect back on year one of Art of Darkness.
We should.
We're going to do that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I love this. I had no idea that they were such innovators in terms of television broadly. And I bet they probably sold a lot of TV sets. We gotta watch Lucy.
Yeah,
that's a huge move.
I'm sure they did. And as they became producers, and Desi was really the powerhouse behind that, they were producing a lot of television as well. They put Twilight Zone on for the first time. They had Desilu Playhouse. They put on The Untouchables, which was a huge hit. They put on a whole bunch of stuff on TV and in movies. They owned RKO Studios, so they owned multiple actual sound stages. They turned it into a big deal.
Show business. And Brad, we got to tell people about the Rod Serling episode. If you're listening to this and haven't listened to that one, listen to the Twilight Zone.
There are some overlaps for sure. Yeah,
classic TV.
Yeah, so we got more to tell about Desi and Lucy. This effort to bring them together through this show, right? There was a kind of a thinking about doing this show would sort of save their marriage, and that was kind of the impetus originally. I mean, you can't plan for stuff to be a huge hit, right? All you can do is do what you want to do and try to do it really well, right? So it was a huge success. It did kind of keep them together for a while. But it didn't necessarily last. And so, after when did I Love Lucy end? Was it 1956?
So, it was 1957 was the 30-minute episodes, and then they took the last couple seasons and did comedy hours. Those ran until 1960.
Right. And in 1960, they also got divorced for real this time. There had been, I think, there's a combination of things, and there's probably different reasons for both of them, but they'd worked very hard. Desi got to drinking more, was stressed out.
I was going to ask earlier, he strikes me as a guy who probably tipped a few back. You got the McCarty family in the background. Yeah.
He was a drinker, and he was a gambler, and he was a philanderer. He lived, that's how he lived. And, but he also
check.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But he was also paradoxically a family man. Maybe not paradoxically, but he was a family man too at the same time, right? His children have very fond memories of him, and all that sort of thing.
I just want to real fast. I mean, Lucy, when she had success, she was afraid something bad was going to happen. Yeah. The way that she described Desi, when he had success, he would destroy it. He would make sure something bad happened. So she said that, he wanted to make all the mistakes in the book and he wanted to suffer the consequences. And that towards the end of their marriage, he was practically jumping out of windows. I mean, he couldn't handle it. He had to tear it all down.
Right. Yeah. She in the late 70s, I think it is, does an interview with Barbara Walters. This is after their long divorce, and she's married to a new guy. And she's, Barbara Walters kind of asks him what went wrong. And Lucy's very, very, she puts a lot of emphasis on, all these things Desi did, and but ultimately he was a loser. And what she meant by that was he had to lose. He had a compulsion to lose, basically. He had a compulsion to be super successful and solve all these problems and make all these things happen. But in the end, he had to destroy it for some reason. It's kind of
running over those tiles again.
Yeah. It's kind of tragic.
Just broken pieces. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So, the relationship gets, with the added stress of the relationship before I Love Lucy was going awry because they weren't spending enough time together. At least that's how they saw it. And then through the end of I Love Lucy, it's not going well because there's too much stress, and I don't think either of them is handling it all that well, right? There's too much pressure. The success is weird. The money is a lot. It's getting to be a lot of, I mean, you're buying a movie studio for $6 million in the 50s. There's a lot of money. She was smart with her money and saved it, invested it, etc. Desi just gambled it away through lavish parties, like they were both in business together, and he somehow went broke and she stayed rich, It was that kind of thing.
Ouch.
Yeah. And then they were getting divorced, and Jolie, correct me if I'm wrong. We should maybe just tell the actual story of how Lucy announced she wanted to get divorced, because there's more than one story and nobody's sure exactly what happened.
Yeah. So from Lucy's point of view, they were pretty much separated. She decided that she wanted the divorce, but she wasn't going to ask for it. She needed to make Desi ask for it. So she made him miserable until he asked. And it was after the last episode was shot, they got into a massive fight. They hadn't been talking on set for almost an entire season. And they would do like the petty, like, could you tell Desi this, when you're like standing right next to each other? And so after that last episode, he said he wanted the divorce, but then she like reacted like shocked to it. Instead of like, she saw it coming. She was trying to make it happen. She like wouldn't talk to him. She called him all kinds of terrible racist things, which is, after so many years of being married and then championing for things. I mean, so that was sort of that one. I know that Desi's account includes, there's a lighter. And in the account of Lucy, this lighter was a truce. It was shaped like a gun. So it was a gun lighter, and you pulled the trigger and it lit the flame. And that was a truce to their fights. And she shot it at him, pointed it at him. And when she pulled the trigger, he had written down the name of somebody he was accusing her of having an affair with on a cardboard and put it up in front of her. But his account is different.
Yeah, his account, he says that after the statement of wanting a divorce, when he got home, she, there was an argument again, and then he says she pulled a pistol on him, a dueling pistol on him, and that she didn't know it was he makes no reference to her knowing that it was a lighter. So he frames it as she literally pulled a gun on him and pulled the trigger, but it turned out that gun was actually just a lighter.
I had a couple of divas.
Yeah.
Drama queens.
But nonetheless, whatever did happen, it ended in yelling in tears in 1960. For Desi, this was kind of it. Like he didn't die right away, obviously, but he fell further into drinking. He stopped working nearly as much. He did get remarried, and he went down to Baja and he built a new house down there. He still had some money left, and still could produce things here and there, and showed up on TV shows here and there. But this was kind of it for him once they got divorced. He would live another, I actually did not write down his death date. I think it's 1986. So he would live another 1980. Yeah, 1986 he would die. So he would live another few years. He would make an appearance on Saturday Night Live, where he spoofs his old shows, including obviously spoofing Saturday Night Live. Their son, Desi Jr., would show up on some stuff with him. I wanted to see this. There was a funny Saturday Night Live thing that they did. They did a skit called "I Love Louie." That's a spoof on "I Love Lucy," where Desi lives with Louis Armstrong, which is just, I don't know. It seems actually like it's kind of funny.
All right.
Yeah, but basically the story of Desi's later years is just falling further into drinking, falling further into gambling. he eventually, along with his son, Desi Jr. had his own battles with primarily alcohol. And it was confusing for Desi Jr. There's a little boy on TV who's not him, who is his parents' son. And when people meet him, they think he's the boy on TV.
Must be a little disorienting.
It's very disorienting. And that must have been part of him kind of falling into, drugs and alcohol and kind of losing his way for a while. Desi Jr. would eventually get sober, and he would get his dad into AA very late in his life. I think right at the end, he was no longer drinking. At least that's the public story. But the one thing is, he never really stopped loving Lucy. It was sort of a thing that never really could end, and the opposite is also true. Lucy never really stopped loving him. It was this sort of thing where it exploded and they couldn't figure out how to piece it to get back together, even though the feelings were definitely still there. He apparently, after they divorced, every year on their anniversary, he would send her a bouquet of carnations, which were her favorite flower, red and white carnations, right? Yeah. Yeah.
The show is called I Love Lucy.
Right.
Oh,
yeah. And
so sad.
He said, when did he say that? He said, it was at they received an award later, and he said, I Love Lucy was never just the title of a show.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm getting a little verklempt here.
I know. Oh. And there's a couple great little moments I just want to hit, and then we'll finish Desi's story. One is there's some home video of and this is long after their divorce, when their first grandson is just a baby, and they're in the pool, and he's meeting grandma and grandpa, and they're in the pool, and Lucy and Desi are in the pool, and it's just funny to see them kind of joking with the baby, but joking with each other, and you can tell there's still a lot of warmth there between the two of them. And apparently, right at the end in 1986, when Desi gets lung cancer, Lucy came to see him, and they watched episodes of I Love Lucy together, and laughed, and all that kind of thing. And the last thing they ever said to each other was on the phone. They both said, I love you. And his cancer accelerated very rapidly, and then 1986, at the age of 1969, he passed away.
At the age of what?
69.
Oh, 69, right?
Yeah.
And was it the Chesterfields who finally got him?
Yeah, it does seem. Yeah, he got lung cancer. He was a heavy lifelong smoker, as many people were then.
Yeah. This slightly premature death is brought to you by Philip Morris.
Right. Yeah.
But that's a beautiful story, and it's nice that they stayed in touch. And
like I said, that you can tell that they, even in his biography, it's interesting, because a lot of people will get divorced and they'll blame the other person, and sometimes very rightly so. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes that person was a real SOB or whatever. But in this, it's in his autobiography, a book. He looks back and he blames himself for things. And he also recognizes that they just made mistakes in some ways. He has a very charitable, I guess my point is, he clearly never stopped being infatuated with Lucy. It never really went away. Yeah.
Yeah, and hers is the same. I mean, a lot of my research is based off of her autobiography, which is called Love, Lucy. And that was actually published after she died. And it was recorded not long after they got divorced. She was remarried, but not, wasn't too far out. And her daughter found it and didn't know that she had recorded it or transcribed it, but she didn't want to say anything bad. And when you read it, she's the exact same way. She doesn't get into anything. She gives him more credit than he probably, I don't know if that's true. Gives him a lot of credit, which they always did.
Yeah.
On interviews, they always were in each other's corner and gave each other more than their share of credit.
That's the one thing I really loved about them as a couple. Altogether, it's a great story, but like, how much they were on each other's team was amazing to me.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I really love that about them. Yeah.
So Lucy,
you guys, and here we are. Y'all are podcasting together. Look at this. Wonderful. All right. Okay, Jolie, take it away. You were saying.
All right. So I'm just going to wrap up Lucy's next couple years after the divorce. So she really wanted to move to Switzerland and have Desi run Desilu. She wanted to just be done with work. And that obviously didn't end up happening. So immediately she did a movie called Facts of Life with Bob Hope. And then she did Wildcat, which was a musical that actually got pretty decent reviews. And so Desi's still in her life at this point. She was injured and he rushed to the hospital like 2 hours away, helped her recuperate. He threw a big opening party at 21 for the Wildcat opening in New York. So then she meets Gary Morton, who's a comedian. She ends up marrying him, and he's younger as well. And he's just he's just steady. No ups, no downs. If you read some articles, they say she didn't love him. She just liked him. I don't think that that's true. I think she just couldn't stand like the chaos, and he was just a constant. Desi, it's unclear how much they got along. She says that they played golf together. Either way, it doesn't sound like they were friends. He called him Barry Norton to poke fun at him instead of calling him Gary Morton. And so I don't think he was ever super, super pleased that she moved on. So mainly Desi ends up convincing her to come back to TV. So he's still running Desilu. And so she and Vivian Vance, who was Ethel on I Love Lucy, they star in the Lucy Show. So the Lucy Show, I actually don't have the dates that ran, but it would have been from around 1962 to probably about 1967. So in 1962, she bought Desi out from Desilu. He was falling asleep at work. He wasn't able to run it anymore. He didn't want to, and they weren't able to find anyone else suitable. So she bought out his shares for $3 million. They bought it for $6 million, and then he retired, and she assumed the role as president. So she was the first woman to own and run a major television studio. During this time, she championed Star Trek. She's actually single-handedly given credit for Star Trek even existing. And then Mission Impossible was another one that they said would not have ever come to fruition had it not been for her. But she didn't like to run the studio. Desi really handled things, and that's what he did best. And it was awkward for her. She didn't feel like the men there really listened to her. She was a little too uptight and serious for like the company picnics. And it was a very young company. So they had gone from 7 to 1,000 employees from 1951 to 1957. And the average age was 32. And during that time, no one had resigned. So it's successful, but it's young, and she just didn't like it. And so she said that the best day of her life was the day that she sold it to Gulf and Western in 1967 for $17 million.
Woo! We're in the money. We're making bucks.
Yeah, from that period of time, just the inflation calculation on that is like times 8 from the mid 60s. So you're talking
it's a lot of money.
$100 million or so in today's money.
Yep. It's Joe Rogan money.
It is. Yeah.
Spotify, if you're out there, we're cheap. You can get us for next
I would do this show for a cool 50 mil.
Yeah. Bargain rate, Art of Darkness. artofdarkpod.com. artofdarkpod.com/Patreon. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah.
And that's coming up soon. The After Dark. I can feel we're winding down. We're well into the third act here. And, but if you want more, you can stick around and we'll give you another 20-30 minutes with the side story about the gangsters and Al Capone and all the rest of it. But Jolie, bring us home. This is fascinating. I had no idea that she was instrumental in like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. That's wild.
Oh yeah, she was a powerhouse. Like I was, I've been handling mostly the Desi duties and not saying as much about Lucy. She was a powerhouse. They were a power couple. This is like the definition of a power couple for sure.
Yeah, she was friends with Carol Burnett, and they went out one day, and she was trying to convince the rest of the board to do something. It was all men, and they, didn't want to listen to her. And she said that she put her foot down, and that was the day that they added the S to the end of her last name. She was something to be reckoned with. So her last major series was Here's Lucy, and that ran from 1968 to 1974. She did do some stuff after that. However, for this one, she tried to pull her kids in, or she did pull her kids in. So she had both Lucy and Desi Jr. on it. She was trying to spend more time with them as they reached their teen years. So while kind of keeping her career. So it worked for a few years. Desi Jr. was in a band, and he was getting into some drugs at the time, and she was trying to kind of keep him on the straight and narrow. He ended up being on the show for, I think, like 2 seasons. Lucy, who is awesome. If you ever listen to any interviews, anything, Lucie Arnaz is fantastic. She stayed on it. So that was sort of her last major one. After that, she didn't spend any of the 17 million either, really. People who knew her said that she dressed in like matching tracksuits. And her house was decorated just as it was in like the 1930s. She didn't change anything. And if she had to change something because it got worn out, she found the exact same thing to put back in it. So she was very frugal. She didn't like to spend even once she had the money. So
that tracksuit thing is pretty fashion forward, actually. That's right. That's in a funny way. She's original yoga pants. Yeah.
Right.
So she took up backgammon. And I will end, the rest of her life, she's kind of just chilling, playing backgammon. And she played backgammon with Betty White. So Betty White, I know.
Rest in peace, Betty White.
He's Betty White. Yeah.
She said they'd get together. She'd have the backgammon all set up, but she was trying to teach Betty because she didn't know how to play. And so she said, okay, I'll take my turn. Now you throw the dice. And then Betty White would throw the dice. And then Lucy would move her pieces, and Betty would say, how am I going to learn if you're playing the game with yourself? But they did it, and they had a lot of fun.
Aww. And we come all the way back to her having this, it's that imaginary friend again. She's moving the pieces. Right. She's moving the pieces for her friend. And I'm sure they were real friends too.
Yes,
and Betty White certainly existed, and Lucille Ball was not Lucifer.
No,
clearly.
I think we could say that confidently.
Jolie, when did she pass away, and what was it?
Yeah. So her last television appearance was presenting an award at the Oscars with Bob Hope on March 29th, 1989. On April 26th, which is my daughter's birthday, she died. So about a month later, she was 77. She had gone into Cedars-Sinai. She had a heart attack. She had surgery. She was doing well. Her daughter left for the night to bring some stuff back. And during the night, she had a ruptured abdominal aorta, which kills you pretty much instantly. And so that was that.
That was it. Yeah.
Did she die in New York City? Is that it?
No, she was in, I think Cedars-Sinai is in Los Angeles.
Oh, in LA. Okay.
Yeah.
They buried her there. I think she was cremated, and then they buried her ashes there, and Dee Dee's ashes were there. And then they realized that she loved Jamestown. I mean, the highlights of her life are when she goes back to Jamestown, whether she's somewhat famous, super famous, and that was very important to her. And so her daughter decided it made more sense to move those ashes to Jamestown. And so we visited the grave when we were there.
We did, yeah.
And it's beautiful. People have it all decorated. There's red hearts that go out to it. That are like spray painted on the ground. And then they ended up, she didn't want to have a funeral, and Lucy ended up doing three, what are they called? They're not funerals, like memorial services.
Yeah.
And had one televised Monday 9 to 9, or no, I think she had them all at 9 to 9:30 on a Monday to celebrate.
I Love Lucy time
life.
Slot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lucy.
Yeah.
The Broken Tiles of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Nicely done, you two.
Hey,
yeah, that's dynamite. I really appreciate that. We're well into a third hour. I'm impressed. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I like that this is kind of our second classic TV episode. So, an interesting.
I didn't think that was going to be an area when we started this show. I didn't think I was going to be so interested in the old TV stuff, to be honest. And every time I dig into it, I'm like, this is pretty fascinating.
I'm afraid we're going to be those guys at the bar or at the get together that know all the names of the old actors and actors. I mean, in a few years, we may be one of those guys, one of those people.
Yeah.
But Jolie, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I'm so grateful. That was a lot of fun.
And you're excellent.
And your love of Lucy and Desi, I think it comes through.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great.
And we're gonna do another 20, 30 minutes on the After Dark episode. We end this with a question, and I think I'll flip this back around on the two of you.
Okay.
And I'm gonna flip it around and ask you, Brad, what do you think Lucy would be doing?
No.
I'm gonna little curveball here at the end. What do you think Lucy would be doing if she was around now?
You know what is interesting? So I don't know that she'd be making new TV shows anymore, but she did towards the end. She became a great talk show guest, like Johnny Carson and those. It's just great. Just this sort of like kind of wisecracking, her brassy kind of just, kind of your tough, old, crazy, hilarious aunt, kind of character. So I think she would be involved in TV, something like that. She'd be somebody you brought out for award shows and onto talk shows and things like that for some comedy, and she'd still be that kind of lovable person that everybody wants to see. I don't know that she'd be making like episodic television anymore. It seemed like that, TV has changed so much that I don't know that she would be the right fit for like a sitcom anymore. But yeah, she would definitely be out there and she would be trying to make people laugh.
Well, and maybe she'd be going on different podcasts and things. She'd be like a friend of the show, Blower Guys. She'd be jumping around, going on this show, going on that show.
Maybe.
Who knows? She might have her own. Yeah, who knows?
Right.
And Jolie, what do you think Desi Arnaz would be doing?
Oh, man. I mean, I feel like he'd be doing some sort of entertainment I don't know. Like, I don't know how you take him out of the entertainment industry. I also don't know how the entertainment industry would, sort of assimilate him and deal with him today.
He'd be leading a Roomba comeback.
A Roomba comeback. He might. Honestly, like that's what I think is coming back. Like that face to face. Like you go to a Moth and it's a small audience, and I think that he'd be wherever he is. He's working up a crowd.
Yeah. And I feel like because he was so cutting edge with the Conga and then with all the television stuff. I feel like they may be in the metaverse. They might be doing the first 3 camera show in the metaverse. They may be doing a Twitch stream that's huge. Who knows? They might be inventing some future thing. But fascinating. Yeah. We're gonna do a little more time on this. And Jolie, thank you again so much for coming on the show. Thank you for lending Brad to me periodically on loan from your marriage.
Yep.
And I think I'm just gonna let's all Conga our way out of this episode. Brad, do you want to start it? How do we do this?
Boom. I can't do the rhythm. I got no rhythm.
Boom, 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 chicka, boom, 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 boom. I love Lucy.
Yeah.
Well, is there a tagline from the show that we could end on? Boom, what does he say? What does he say to Lucy?
And Lucy loves me. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. All right. I love Lucy and Lucy loves me. All right, guys. We'll come back in a few minutes and do that. Later. Peace.